Welcome to the Glendale Water and Power Commission meeting. Today is August 5th, 2013. I am filling in for President Hugh Yao today. Can I please have roll call?
For the record, Commissioner Ajemian will also be absent. Commissioner Camargo?
Here.
Commissioner Chan?
Present.
Commissioner Hale?
Here.
Next item.
2 consent items. A, approval of the July 18, 2013 special meeting minutes.
Okay. I reviewed the minutes and I have no changes. How about
I second that.
you second that? You're okay?
Yes.
Okay. Please have the minutes approved as is. Before we go on to the next item, I noticed that I have quite a few speakers cards here. In the interest of time, I would like to limit these sessions to 3 minutes, please. Okay. So next item, electric rate plan.
3 action items. A, electric rate plan.
Good afternoon, President Chan, members of the GWP Commission. If you recall, we were before you on July 17th with a fairly extensive presentation on the rate plan. It was more of a where we were, where we are, where we're going from here, at least what we're proposing. Following that meeting, we took back all your suggestions and recommendations and have provided you with a presentation today that takes into consideration some alternatives to the 87522 scenario that we had presented. I have our City Manager, Scott Ochoa, sitting next to me, who's going to be making that presentation momentarily.
Thank you.
Good afternoon to the board. We'll go just by way of very quickly taking my cue from comments made last time to make sure that we get right to the meat of the matter. Very quick presentation to update you as to where we are and present some of the findings from the options that were discussed by the board, or the commission rather. In terms of what it is that we're asking for, looking for a rate plan. The base rates had not been increased during the Great Recession last time since 2008. We still have, however, the need for significant infrastructure investment to the tune of $60 million, and at the same time wanting to develop a pay-as-you-go system for future infrastructure investment. And dually adding to the challenge is to replenish the cash reserves of GWP, understanding that all of these needs and wants are interconnected. Let me break in at this point to allow Mr. Elliott to give a very, very brief overview of the reserve policy established by the Council as was requested by the Commission. So with that, Bob, why don't you talk a little bit about the reserve policy?
Sure, thank you. The cash reserve policy was adopted by City Council in August of 2006, and it comprised of different components in terms of cash available on hand for the utility to have for various needs in case of emergencies. Of the $124.1 million, which is the adopted reserve and has not been adjusted by Council, and that's not to say it couldn't be adjusted by Council, but as it sits now, that's the adopted policy. 57.7 was an operating reserve or working capital reserve for, you know, any incident would have happened with earthquake perhaps. There was $40 million for contingency reserves. That's if big blowout or, you know, storms, what have you, for contingency. There was $10 million in rate stabilization reserve at that time, set up for a variety of issues that might happen with costs, and then there was $16 million built in for a gas reserve. Again, that brings us up to the $124 million, which is the current reserve. The plan that we brought forth to you approaches 124. It gets to about 114 by the 5th year. Still short, but arguably it gets close. So that comprises of the components of the policy at this point in time.
Question, can you talk further about the $10 million rate stabilization portion?
Well, I assume, I was not here when that passed, but I assume it was set up for much like a fuel adjustment or something to that effect. If there was ability to draw down on that in time, if to come back and adjust rates, they had a reserve to apply to increasing costs for increased energy costs at that point in time.
So a smoothing effect.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
And are those dollar amounts statutory, or are they calculated as a percentage of revenues?
Those were adjusted, or amounts that were adopted based off different levels at the time. It really wasn't a percent of, or I would argue it probably would be wise to adjust it to something of like 6 to 8 months of operating costs rather than having a fixed amount at this point in time. But as yet, that's the way it is at this point.
I thought this current scenario that you're proposing will get us to that, or 110 million reserve in 3 years, or is it 3 or 5 years?
5 years, it approaches 114 million.
That's what I'm seeing in this table.
It still doesn't get us back to 124.
Right. Were there discussions before where you were talking about 3 years at one point?
That was a discussion that was brought up by this commission at the last meeting, to go
Okay.
to a 3-year program to see where that would leave us. And we'll
Okay.
talk about that here.
Okay, all right, so right now it's 5 years, okay, and it goes to 104. No, 114.
114 over
Okay.
the 5 years.
Okay.
Okay, then moving on, this is what we're talking about. This is the plan that had been proposed, 87522. This is a summary where you see in the first year the incremental changes here on low income, $3.65, multifamily $4.64, residential single family at the average of $6.59 per kilowatt hour, $9.16, and you can follow it across $8, $6, $2, and it tracks with the 8%, 7%, 5%, 2%, 2%. Here is the same information, but it shows for the compounded and both system average rates as well as the by category rates. So system wide is 87522, residential is actually 8.8, 7.7, 5.5, and so on. And you can see how that breaks down. The reason why, and as I mentioned at the last time, this caused some degree of consternation among our customers, residential customers at the meetings, was because they couldn't understand why they were having to pay marginally more than commercial uses. But again, under Prop 26, we are mandated to charge back the cost to the end user. This is in graphic form, both what the rate represents by way of our net income, by way of the pay-go line. The dotted line is debt service coverage. The solid red line is the reserves. This is the test that we applied to the various scenarios that we went through. So does it achieve a debt service greater than 3 times, meaning that it's a prudent, conservative way for us to float a revenue bond? Yes. Does it get capital investment by 2017, meaning pay-go? Yes. Is it Prop 26 compliant? Yes, by way of looking at the cost of service analysis. The net operating loss is less than $500,000 by 2015, meaning we're getting back to a break-even sooner. And you can follow along in terms of net increase, $6 million by 2016, 13.3 by 2018, and the reserve cash level at the end of the 5 years, $114 million. Now, the Commission had asked that we look at other scenarios that fit within the cost of service analysis. It's critically important that we understand that that cost of service analysis has room on either side of the rates that we are proposing, but that room to maneuver is extraordinarily limited. If you were to go with a 6% first year, or a 5% first year, or a 4% first year, you're basically having to throw out the cost of service analysis, develop a whole new set of assumptions that may or may not ultimately be tied to the actual cost of operating the utility, and then map that out as our consultant has done in the COSA that you have as part of this rate plan. So that's why I bring that up to advise that while we're recommending 87522, within that COSA, you could go to this type of scenario. You could go a little bit higher if need be, but you really can't vary much more than that without throwing out the COSA and doing a whole new study. So this was a scenario that was suggested, 76533, basically drop the first 2 years by 1%, add them onto the back year by 1%, and what you see here is 28.9% versus the 29.1% compounded total. You see that the system averages are still the same, but there is an impact here, of course, because we're pushing back ever so slightly the rate of increase in those electric rates. Again, very similar types of criteria on the test. We're still able to meet our debt service coverage. We are still able to get to capital investment by the end of the plan, still 26 compliant, still able to get to a north of $100 million net cash reserve. Again, the difference between this and even the next scenario is that the recommended scenario, recommended rate plan, gets you there sooner. You know, that's entirely within the purview of the Commission to recommend if that's of value, and it's within the Council's discretion to accept if it has value to them. But the second scenario, very similarly, 765 but 44, evening out on the backside, wanting to, along with alternative number 3, as was suggested by Mr. Hale, wanting to look at really what does year 4 and year 5 look like, and what is more realistic given the volatility in the market, but still giving some relief on the front end. You can see that the compounded total for residential is 31.4 because you're increasing that back end by 2 percentage points, dropping by the 1 percentage point on the first 2 years. You can see that the system weighted averages overall do indeed go up, and rather significantly. I suppose if I had my druthers, this would be the plan that I would select because it gives you greater funding reliability and predictability in those out years where we did have some concerns. As I said last time, we're trying to make sure that we model some good faith and still be realistic about what the market could be by going to 2% increases. Certainly hedging that by going 3 or even 4% is something that is to be taken very, very seriously as we look at a 5-year rate plan. This is graphically the same depiction, again, meeting all the tests that we need to meet, but there again, it gets us to a point where we have a pretty significant $110 million
Is that correct?
cash reserve at the end of the 5 years, a reflection of more stability on the back end, but we're not correcting the trend as quickly as we would on the 87522. Scenario 3 was one that was very interesting. If we looked at 87500, not so much even 00, but rather 875, recognizing that year 4 and year 5 are outliers to the degree such that we may be better off going to 875, going to a 3-year rate plan, and then coming back in 3 years and doing a new rate plan and a new COSA based on what we knew at that point. The problem that we have, however, is that if we are to compress the rate structure into a 3-year under this COSA, compress it from 5 years into 3 years, 875 really doesn't work because this number would have to be closer to 11 or 12. This one would have to be closer to 9, maybe 10, and this one would have to be 7. And so going back to those original concepts of why the 875, the idea was to temper the plan out over a 5-year basis. And as I say, it does drive the rates higher in the shorter term.
So I have a couple questions on that issue. One is the reason for compressing that rate table. I mean, what is motivating the need to generate that capital right up front very quickly? Is that the bond buying, or is that a cash flow issue?
It's both. It is that we are operating in negative cash on an annual basis. We know that we need to do a bond issue for the revenue bonds, so we need to get the debt service coverage up. And so the combination of those two factors really are what's driving that number.
Okay. And then on the Prop 26 issue, what's the analysis on the Prop 26 concern?
Well, the concern with Prop 26 is that each rate class must pay no more than its share. So in the cost of service analysis, there is an analysis of what the appropriate allocation is to each of the rate classes. So when you start changing percentages, you risk changing that analysis as far as what the allocation is to each class.
Okay, so it's the lack of data that we have in the COSA on a 3-year rate increase more than the notion of 3 years being a bad thing under Prop 26?
Correct.
Okay.
But understanding that if we were to do it based on even the COSA that we have, these three numbers have to increase. Yeah.
Okay.
Looking at slide 7, actually, let me see. Yes, slide 7, comparing that to slide 5, I am wondering why the reserve cash for 2018 is 104.
Because you're not building it up on the front end as quickly as you would be under the staff recommended scenario. You're course correcting sooner under 87522 than you are under 76533.
No, we're looking at 76533 comparing to 76544. Are we not?
No.
Okay.
Slide 5
I
is
see.
yeah.
All right. That's 110. Okay. I see. All right. Okay.
So just by way of conclusion in terms of the staff recommendation, yes, the 5 years, trying to temper the rates over that period of time for economic considerations, getting back to net positive income as quickly as we can, generating pay-go for the out years, and in the other items we talked about in the longer staff presentation in terms of the sustainability for long-term, making sure that the system is reliable and we can meet all of our RPS goals. Same kind of thing. All right, so we do have, we dropped in those slides? We're going to show you comparisons in terms of net impact on ratepayers based on these different scenarios as discussed by the Commission. The proposed plan, Alternative 1, and Alternative 2. So, proposed plan, you saw this at the very beginning. In terms of single family at 659, which is the average, the real-time average usage, $9 in the first year, $8.85 second, 6, and so on. When you look at rate plan number 1 alternative, that $9 and the 916 drops down to the 784. Oh, I'm sorry. That's right. Yeah, 784, and 885 becomes 721. So, is there a difference? Most definitely, there is a difference. I think as we put together the proposal, the difference was marginal enough that the move to heal GWP's finances sooner outweighed the marginal economic benefit. But there again, that's why we come to this commission. That's why we go to the city council to make sure that we don't look at it in a vacuum and that it gets put in proper context. So again, this is the first alternative. So you see what the impacts are there, especially in those 2 higher years of rate increases. And then similarly for Plan 2, you see the difference out here in those out years, the $5.36, the $5.59, going back to 76533. It's 411, 425, 536, 559. And if you go back all the way to 87522, you can see again in the out years you're getting to rather small increases, monthly increases on a year-over-year basis.
Let's go back.
We also showed you last time what. Oops. All right. There we go. What this means in terms of the real-world impact. You could see under the proposed plan in 1314 that single family at 659, the single family average monthly bill goes to 112. That's actually less than what it was in 8.9 and is just slightly higher than 7.8. Which I would argue demonstrates some pretty good value with respect to what GWP is able to deliver and where we are in the marketplace. Truly, I think this is kind of the tail of the tape. It does represent a significant percentage increase, but when you look at the dollar increase over where we have been over this last period of time, it certainly puts into context what it is that we are asking for. Similarly, when you look at the multifamily bill, on average monthly bill $56.14. You're back here in the 08, 09 range, and you can see how it's dipped down, and we're asking that it come back up on a base rate basis. Small monthly, same kind of deal. We're looking back at the 07, 08, 08, 09 in terms of what the new rate would be under 1314 in the rate plan. And for large customers, you'd have to go all the way back to 06, 07 to get into that range in terms of what it is that we're talking about. This item, low income discount, took a great deal of discussion from the Commission, and most certainly to the extent that we're talking about significant percentage increases in the first 2 years. I think it's important that the Commission gives your full consideration and advice to Council as to what this program should look like. Currently, here's what the bills are. Here's what the bills are projected to be on an average 250 kilowatts per month usage for these customers. Today, we provide a $10 discount. That is effectively, you do the math, 25%. Important to know, it's a flat fee. It's not a percentage, but a flat fee. And so you see it depicted here, and this is what the bill is after you apply the credit for the low-income discount. So, my apologies for the red. It's kind of hard to see, but you can see it on the other screen and in your handout. One thing that was discussed was how do we keep whole those customers? What would we have to do? Well, this is a depiction showing here keeping that rate flat. Today, the rate that is being paid is $39.94, discounted by $10 for a net rate of $29.94. You can see that's held constant throughout the 5-year rate plan. In order to do that, this $10 needs to grow to $22.23 over that same period of time. Can that be done? Anything can be done, but the issue is that ultimately we end up with a loss in the public benefits fund to the tune of $3.4 million. There's a $1.4 million fund balance today, but you would eat up all of that and run into the red to the tune of $2 million in order to accomplish this here. At the same time, you would, in order to make that happen, you'd have to reduce solar incentives, energy efficiency programs, and other types of incentives that are there as part of the public benefit program in order to make this viable. So can it be done? It can be done. Whether or not it should be done is a matter of your recommendation and the Council's policy. By way of comparison, just so you know what everyone else does, GWP, Burbank, Pasadena, LADWP, and Edison. There are programs in all of these jurisdictions. We don't know what some of those other folks have by way of enrollment, but our program by far dwarfs Burbank's. We do not have an age requirement, as do most others. The monthly discount, as I say, is $10, which, as you can see here in Edison, it is a 20%. It's a percentage, basically tying back to, it looks like $8 there. They do have their guidelines that they subscribe to. My point is that the program we have today is one of the more progressive programs out there on the market, and something that I think a lot of folks depend on. So in trying to get it to a point that it's meaningful, we have an opportunity, we have a chance basically to take that $10 and again, keeping it at a flat amount, but making it equivalent by way of percentage to the rates. Today it's 25% of the rate. If we were to do it hold constant, we'd go to $11 next year, $12, $12.50, $12.50 again, $13 by the end of the plan. I told you last meeting that $12.50 is where we think we can stretch it. If the council so chooses, we can get to 13. That would have some probably marginal, I even dare say minor impact on some of the other public benefit programs. Again, it's doable, and it holds by way as a percentage constant what the impact of the program is today.
Can you talk further about how that program gets funded such that it is compliant with Prop 26?
It's actually grandfathered in under Prop 26. I'll defer to City Attorney, but it is a public benefits charge.
It's a pre-existing program. That's something that could not be adopted now, but it is a 3.6% tax on the utility bill that applies, and in order to increase those amounts, it would be a matter of adjusting the public benefits charge budget, which gets adopted by council. It wouldn't be a component of the electric rate increase.
Thank you.
Earlier, you mentioned if we don't change the percentage rate, 5-year total loss of $3.4 million. With this proposal, which is the set 25%, I know you mentioned it's doable. How big an impact would that be in terms of dollars?
We would be, actually, that's a good question. In terms of the fund balance, do we know, Craig, where the fund balance might be projected at the end of the 5 years?
Yes. Craig Keenan, Business Transformation and Marketing Administrator. I have that sheet here. Okay. Under this, the fund would remain, we would have at the end of 5 years about $2.6 million in the PBC fund. We need to keep a cash balance in there in order to meet our invoices and stuff every month. But it would grow by a little over $1 million if we go with this proposal here.
Okay, earlier you mentioned it declines from 1.4 million to negative 2.
Right.
So at the current time, we have 1.4 million.
We have 1.4 million fund balance today.
Fund balance today. Now, if we go this route,
You will
that's
still
suggested, we will still gain
fund balance.
positive.
That's why I said the impact would be marginal in those out years. You might have to do some trade-off of other incentives, but you could still do it. Now, if you went and negated the entire increase on these customers,
Then we
that's
go
when you run
negative.
negative.
Then we go negative. Okay. All right, thanks.
Just by way of, in terms of summary and taking you through the paces certainly that we've all gone through, and I know you've gone through over the last couple of weeks looking at all of this material, the trade-offs that we look at are pretty straightforward, and I think we've run out of kind of easy fixes for the financial concerns on GWP. This notion of pay now or pay later, it's the Jiffy Lube model. If we have to pay later, we're most assuredly going to pay more for those elements of the infrastructure that we know have to be replaced, but we won't replace, and so we're basically just pushing the challenge further down the road. We do need to try and catch up, and I recognize, and certainly everyone on staff does, that there's no good time to catch up. We, if you recall, put forward a more modest rate plan last year. Ultimately, through the summer, and many of the same folks came out and said many of the same things, that it just wasn't the right time to try to catch up for those years of not doing rate increases. And not too surprisingly, that seems to be the same narrative that you hear now. And it's not invalid. The point is that it's just never a good time. I think when you look at those the comparative slides that we showed you last time, whereas from the standpoint of where are we in the market, in the single-family category, even after the first year, we are still the lowest value or the best value, lowest cost in the market. On the commercial side, we're about middle of the pack. In the second year's rate increases, presuming everybody else does their modest increase, and we were to move forward with either 7 or 6 in that second year, if that's the Commission and Council's pleasure, we start to move into that from the very lowest into the lowest half. And probably my guess, based on the other increases and the rate activity we've seen, our thinking is that we will end up by the end of these 5 years right smack dab in the middle of the market in terms of what our rates are and what the cost to the ratepayer is. The problem is that instead of getting there over a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year period, we're getting there over a 5-year period, so it's compressed. So I do think we can still be competitive in the marketplace, but if not, the real question, the hard question, is whether or not we actually belong in the electrical business at all. I do think that we can moderate the impact on the low-income ratepayers. To what degree, that'll be a function of what this Commission recommends to Council and what ultimately that we can afford. We talked earlier about the reserve policy. We have adopted the policy. It is set out as a policy. Policies can change. But similar to the discussion on the infrastructure, we said at the very beginning, all of these things are interrelated. To the extent that the infrastructure is aging and not being replaced fast enough, well, then that probably argues where you need to have more money in reserve because things are apt to break down and that cost grows. If we are doing more in the way of preventative maintenance and shoring up what our deferred infrastructure costs are, well, then we probably have more room to maneuver on the replenishment of the reserves. But it's one or the other. And then this notion of reshaping the COSA, and I have it in quotes there because we do have to be very careful. Prop 26 is something that is still very new. We are doing our dead level best to make sure we are compliant with it through the study that's been prepared, but we need to take care that we are not moving too fast or too loose to find a politically expedient, economically painless type of answer to what is, at this point, a bitter pill to swallow. We've run out of the easy answers. We need to come to grips with what the costs of ownership are. So at the end of the day, really what we look at are those two decisions kicking the can, which probably ends up meaning that if we stay in the electric business, we're going to have this same discussion in 2 or 3 or 4 years from now, presuming we're still here in business, or to course correct and try to fix the problem now and then try to maintain the system as best we can going forward versus fixing the system.
Can we, before you leave that slide, so you've mentioned a few times the concept of question of whether Glendale should be in the electric utility business. So can you provide some background as to the level to which this commission and or the city council has actually entertained that question?
Every now and again, it does come up. You'll have council members ask themselves publicly in council meetings whether or not we belong in this business. It's no secret that most cities are not. A lot of cities that have utilities, they have a water utility, a sewer utility. Having an electric utility, especially with a power plant, not one that just distributes electricity but actually has the capacity to generate it, is something that's fairly rare. If the cost of ownership is something that we're not prepared to handle, then perhaps we need to have that real discussion in something other than a rhetorical way. Because up until now, it's been largely rhetorical as a what if. At this point, with net losses that we have, and if we are not prepared to move forward with a rate plan, at least a sustainable one, then I think that needs to move more into a concrete discussion. And really, what the options are, as I'm sure you know in the industry, nothing that monumental would happen quickly. That would take a couple, 3, 4 years to even pull together. So we need to know sooner or later, are we going to stay in the electric business or not? Because if we're not, if truly we're not, then we need to align all those gears to move us in a direction to divest, because it will take a good period of time.
I'd also add that given that it's going to take 3, 4, 5 years to spin that whole process down, if we have an insolvent utility that is not financially sound, the value that the city will get for selling off that utility is not that great anyway.
That's true.
Which puts us in a damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of situation. So I'll just throw that out there.
Just one guy talking.
That's just me. Yeah, exactly.
One other comment, and that is another item I would suggest belongs on the understanding trade-offs piece, is the similar in some respects to the reserve policy being modified or revisited, would be the transfer, the matter of the transfer. The level of the transfer, is that appropriate? So both of those issues I think should be viewed in conjunction with the proposed rate increase.
Most definitely. So there you have it. In terms of the just general and brief overview, those were the alternatives that were presented by the Commission. We have provided some analysis to those, and certainly we welcome your questions and suggestions.
Well, we talked about the first scenario extensively last meeting, and I understand the importance of moving forward, but I understand before we make any decision or even motion, we should let our speakers go first, right? Okay? I'm sorry? 3 minutes, yes, please. 3 minutes. Do you have any comments, Commissioner Jamian? I know you just joined us. I just want to make sure.
Good evening, everybody. I just got back from jury duty. I was excused right before 4 p.m., so I will review documents. I have actually had some time to review and just have an idea about what I want to do moving forward. Thank you.
Just one more. Okay. First speaker, Herbert Milano, please.
Commissioners, my name is Herbert Milano. I've been coming to these commissions for the past 7 or 8 years. Today is the first time that I ever heard anyone really taking any serious comment with regard to trying to sell the utility as an option. There's only been one councilman who has been presenting that continually from time to time, and that's Councilman Najarian. But this is the first time in all of the years that I've been coming here that has never been a consideration or an option. And I think that we should pay heed to this whole concept, because the problems of the utility are not a problem created or stemming from the utility, but rather due to the transfers that have occurred during all these years and the violations of the propositions of the California Constitution and the violation of the city's own charter. What bothers me about this whole process and the verbiage that I hear so often is that there are stakeholders in this city that are not well off, significant number. I did a study a couple of years ago where I brought in the number and I requested the number of people who got a 48-hour notice of impending shutoffs in 1 year. The number was 45,000. These are the number of notices that are being sent out. I have the documents here for you to show you. There are small businesses who are struggling. The recession is not over. But what is consistent about this lack of infrastructure is that you depend significantly on the financial reports of the city, of the utility. And the financial reports of the utility took 8 months to produce. Why aren't you getting a monthly report? Why aren't you getting those cash balances on a continual basis? Why aren't you looking and evaluating at the reserves on a month-to-month basis? None of this should be a surprise. And your role as commissioners, as a board, is to look out for the financial stability of the utility first and how it serves all the stakeholders of the city. The policies of the city in doing the transfers has been damaging to the utility for a long time, and we have been discussing this for many, many years. There is no problem if there is no transfer. The other is the issue having to do with where the priorities are. An electric utility, you have the power generation, you have the transmission lines, you have the transformers, basic things that you can estimate what the needs are on a year-to-year basis, on a month-to-month basis, get a status report. But you're not getting a succinct synthesis of what you actually need. All of a sudden we come and there's a big surprise, even consideration of selling the utility. How amazingly ridiculous that is. You need to come to terms with the fact that the infrastructure has not been maintained, and when there was money to put it in infrastructure, they put it into someplace else other than what was essential, meaning the smart grid process that could have waited for the city to take care of its basic needs. This is the discussions. You need to know how the impact is on small businesses, retired people, and people with insufficient funds, even to meet those small amounts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Milano. Our next speaker, Mr. Bergi Karapetian.
Thank you very much, Commissioners, Manager. I'm speaking on behalf of the Armenian National Committee. You should have received my letter this morning detailing our position. I want to share some things with the public that hasn't had the opportunity to receive that letter. We are looking at this in a slightly different way than a 8% or 8.8% increase on the residential increase, because we talk about the base rate not having been changed for the last 5 years. Well, the increase on the base rate is not 8.8%. It is 13% or more. So if we're going to talk apples, let's talk about apples, but not mix apples and oranges. We're taking the fuel adjustment rate, we're adding that to the rate, and now we're increasing at 8% on top of that. So therefore, it's a much larger increase on the base rate than if we were just doing the increase on the base rate. But we will continue having a fuel adjustment. This time it's going to be called a ECAC, and it will allow for an additional half a cent increase every year to be adjusted twice a year, which will lead at the end of the first year to at least a 3 to 4% additional increase. So you see the projections are putting us into an area that we might end up having even more money than is being calculated because of the ECAC. But ECAC is not the only one. There are two other adjustments: the regulatory adjustment charge and the revenue decoupling charge. These two do not have any cap as far as we could see. We tried to read the huge document that was made public on Friday, and we couldn't find any cap on those additional charges. Hopefully there is, but again, it is a way that increases can happen without the council members and the city council or you having have a say in the increases. Finally, I want to look at the total outcome of the money that is coming in. After 5 years, there will be an additional $220 million that will have been generated due to the bond being issued and to the increases that are happening, not counting the adjustment charges increases. The projection is that there is a capital needs of $94 million. So $220 million when there's a capital needs of $94 million. Somehow it doesn't add up, so we're putting all of the money in the reserve because we've been depleting the reserve due to the transfers, not because we haven't been doing the improvements or the maintenance. Finally, the increases are going to result in an additional $11 million in additional utility users tax revenue to the city in 5 years. So that will be additional revenue that will come into the city due to the increase. So we hope that those will be the kind of discussions that we would have. Otherwise, it's very easy to show the numbers and make it sound very compelling. But I think you need to look at, is there really a need of this kind of a huge increase, astronomical increase in rates? So we hope that you will look at substantially reducing the transfer of funds to the general fund and reduce the level of cash reserve, authorize a lower bond issuance and lower pay go. And that might be able to help you keep it at a lower rate increase than it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any response from staff? No?
We can do all.
At the end? That sounds good. Sounds good. All right. Next speaker, Mr. Aram Kazazian.
Good afternoon. My name is Aram Kazazian. As you know, I am been in Glendale for over 42 years now. It's a shame what's going on. You have been provided with some inaccurate information. Even some of the meetings we went to regarding the rate hike, you had the Gestapo agents over there telling you what you can do, what you can say, where you can talk. You could not have an open dialogue, which was very bad. I recommend that this commission immediately postpone this until you can have a large community meeting and discuss all the issues with all the community members, but not the way it was done, not the way it was done that you are not even allowed to open your mouth and say something. You'll be out of the room right away, which was a shame. This city held that kind of a procedure. And don't tell me that's not. Now, 4 years ago I came over here. I knew Glendale Water and Power is going to lose money. I informed this commission, I informed City Council, I informed what was going on, and nobody paid attention 4 years ago. Now you're paying attention a little bit too late. Let the people of Glendale get involved. Let them see what's going on in Glendale Water and Power and bring up the issues to you over here instead of hiding behind doors. The information you received today, it's all garbage. Believe me, nothing is accurate, and nothing you've been fed in this city by Glendale Water and Power is accurate. There's only 3 people in this out of Glendale Water and Power sitting back here I can only trust, and the rest of them, I'm telling you, it's all for themselves only. Nobody is giving the proper information. They all want to do what they want to do, and that's what they're going to do. There's a public utility, open it to the public get involved and run it. If not, close it down. Like Mr. Ochoa said, if you cannot handle it, you can't handle the heat, get out of it then. Okay, that's what we want. This has been going on over 100 years, this utility. It's a great thing for the city, but not the way it's been run. The last 4 years, this has been the most disastrous thing that's ever happened. So please see if you can postpone this. All the businesses are hurting. All the residents are hurting. You're saying that residents are paying $29, $30 a month. What a garbage. There's nobody pays that kind of money. I have not seen a single resident that I know of in the city pays $29 a month. That's only to run a refrigerator. That means they cannot even turn a TV on. That means they cannot even have an outside porch light on, sit outside, enjoy life. You have deprived people. It's your job, it's yours as a commission to really look after the people at this point in time, and I advise you to do so. It's important. So postpone it and let the people get involved and talk about it. $73.5 million was spent on the smart meter program, and they said no, it's only $30 million. I have all the records. I received over 2,000 pages of documents on the smart meter program, and I have it. I can bring it to you in boxes of boxes. It tells you exactly what was paid for. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Mr. Frank Gallo.
Good afternoon. My name is Frank Gallo, and I'm going to elaborate a little bit about what Mr. Kasazian just mentioned. A 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house requires a 2.5-ton AC. That sucks about 4 kilowatts hour. Times 8, that's 32, just in one day. Times 30, you are at about 900 kilowatts per month, just with an AC unit. You are telling us that the average consumption is about 250 kilowatts per month. That's what you have here for the low-income people. Now, let me tell you this. There are a lot of senior citizens in this town who live on a fixed income, who stay home most of the day, who use that AC unit. Even if you use a wall unit, that will require you at least 2 kilowatts per hour. So how are you telling me that that person just spend 250 kilowatts per month? The minimum that a person like that will expend is about 1,000 kilowatts per month. If they don't use it, what's going to happen to those people? They are senior citizens. Now, if they use it, how are they going to pay for it? Have you even considered that in the increase? I don't think $10 is going to make a major difference when you have a bill of $150 for 1 month. You are considering here $10, and that could go up to $12.50. Is that going to make a big difference for those people? How are you considering those people in this rate increase? What are you doing about them? Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Mr. Harry Zavos.
Commissioners, my name is Harry Zavos. Before I begin, I'm passing a handout that I'll refer to not only here but in other presentations. I hope to walk through this in oral communication. I don't know whether I'll be out of order or in order. I wish to do it merely as explanatory of it, but I will refer to it in the comments I have to make.
Thanks.
Council, we have been transferring money from the utility, money paid by people in order to get electricity, that's being used for other than providing them with electricity. Now, it's well known that I think those are illegal transfers under the charter, but for the moment, let's set that aside and assume that the city can transfer as a budgeted item of the revenue funds rather than transferring out of surplus. If you'll turn to page 4 of your handout, and if you go down to that paragraph that begins with the words "at the end of each fiscal year," an amount equal to 25% of the operating revenues of the Department of Glendale Water and Power, and then drop down to where it says shall be transferred from said Glendale Water and Power Surplus Fund to the General Reserve Fund. That's my quarrel with the city, that the current transfers are illegal, but let's assume that it's an obligation of the revenue fund regardless of any surpluses. The following words are as follows: provided that the council may annually or at or before the time for adopting the general budget for the ensuing fiscal year reduce said amount or wholly waive such transfer if in its opinion such reduction or waiver is necessary to ensure the sound financial position of said Department of Glendale Water and Power. Now, if in fact we are operating in the red, and if we have depleted our reserves, it seems to me that's a dire situation for the utility. And the charter contemplates when that happens, you husband all the resources of the utility and keep them within the utility to address that financial problem. You don't simply continue to transfer and at the same time ask for rate increases. Now, I do believe that it is worthwhile for this commission to consider, and I'd be happy to serve or get whatever input I could give if it was welcome, if not fine, the idea of selling the utility. Much of the value of the utility, is that 3 minutes? Okay. Let me just point out that much of the value of the utility is not the production of energy, but the transmission lines and the customer lists, which is very, very valuable asset.
Thank you. Okay, that's it for this item.
Okay. Would you like me to go through and respond to some of these?
Please.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think this will help for one of the comments made by Mr. Milan. Actually, the common thread for a number of the speakers. Let's see, where are we? Oh, it's not in this particular slide. My apologies. If you recall the slide, well, you can still use one of these to show the same thing. What you see here, average monthly single-family bill, which, and for Mr. Kazazian's benefit, we aren't saying that somebody's paying us on the average monthly single-family bill, or Mr. Gallo, whoever it was, that they're paying us $30. We show that as being up here around $100 a month. My point is that when you look at these base rates, you could see complete stagnation. Our revenue has stagnated, and any of the business people that are here in the room will tell you that when that revenue stagnates and when your costs are fixed, you end up crossing over the lines in terms of whether or not you're profitable or unprofitable. And what you have here is a situation where those base rates have not increased since 07-08, yet other costs of doing business have indeed increased. So the real issue that we are talking about, heartstrings about all of our various customer classes notwithstanding, as a pure dollars and cents economic business discussion, is what do we do about stagnating revenue? Well, in most any other business environment, you either can get out of that business, you can adapt, migrate, or die. Get out of that business, go out of business, or start to adjust and adapt and charge more if there is a demand for your product or service. That's effectively what we are asking for here. The discussion about the FAC charge, under Prop 26, we are incorporating the existing fuel adjustment charge into that base rate. When you look back, if you recall the slide from last time that showed that the fuel adjustment charge ratcheted up in I think it was 08, 09, and 9, 10, and then came back down in 10, 11, 12, 11, 12, 12, 13. If you recall that slide that showed that, because that's effectively a pass-through above what our pro forma fuel adjustment number was in that base rate, in the rates that had been offered previously. All we are doing in this particular rate plan is to take that amount and program it into the actual, what we're calling base rates, and zeroing out the fuel adjustment charge, the decoupling charge, and the regulatory charge. So to the extent that somebody may say that the fuel adjustment charge is really part of what this increase isn't really, it's a little disingenuous, because that fuel adjustment charge at a pro forma level was part of those original base rates that were last adjusted in 07, 08. And in the following year, as the price of fuel increased, it ticked up. I want to say it was 8.1%, ticked up again another 5%, and then came back down about 11.5% over the ensuing 2 years. So it's important to understand that distinction. We covered that in detail last time. I can understand how somebody might get confused by it, but it still doesn't make it accurate. And by the same token, when we talk about that fuel adjustment charge, by the very nature that in the past, recent history, we've shown that those adjustment charges go up and those adjustment charges come down as they are pass-throughs. I would think the good faith and credibility of GWP is such that people understand if the pro forma comes up slightly short in one of these areas, and that number has to tick up based on what the statute allows, but then there's every confidence that if that cost center goes away, that you will see that that number start to tick back down, because we've done it, we've shown it, and it happens and it's happened on a regular basis. The notion of reducing the transfer, and Commissioner Camargo had mentioned it, most certainly that is an element. That is one of the discussions that happens as a function of setting rates. What I can tell you is that the Council has looked at the full breadth and scope of this particular issue and decided repeatedly over the last several years that the transfer is, as I think the fourth largest revenue source to the city's general fund, is such that they are not prepared to make wholesale reductions of that transfer. At this point, it represents 9.6% of operating revenues, which is more in alignment with the surrounding utilities. Our goal is to get it down to a flat 9% and lock it into that number. If you look at it just on the electrical side, because we don't transfer water revenue anymore, though other folks do, that's why we look at GWP total revenues. When you look at just electrical, it ticks up to about 11.5%, and that is too high. You've heard me say it, and you've seen, once again, the good faith and credibility of the city of Glendale and its utility, that over the last 2 years, the last 2 budget cycles, that number has come down $500,000. Our goal, if you saw the budget and the 5-year financial forecast, is to continue to ratchet that number down, and we've done it over the last 2 years, and 2 of the toughest years in recent memory with our budgets, and continue to drop that number, and we'll continue to do that. This notion of lowering PAYGO or lowering the bond, kind of similar to the discussion we had, it's kind of a pick and choose what you want, pick your poison, because I would submit to you that if you are going to reduce the bond, then you probably need to have the higher reserve, because more things will begin to break on you sooner, and they will cost you more on those out years to fix them because you didn't do the preventative maintenance on the front end. By the same token, if you are going to reduce the PAYGO in those out years, year 4, year 5, then you had better have a very healthy reserve, because you will be drawing on that reserve much the way that GWP has done over the last 5 years. I mean, history will indeed repeat itself. It's at this point, I dare say it's somewhat elementary that all these pieces fit together and they move kind of in concert, because we've lived this very experience. We have consciously made the choice not to increase rates, yet to continue to invest in infrastructure and to continue to run an operating deficit and make the transfers to the general fund. Those are all true statements, and we see what the result is. So if the council is not wanting or willing to make the reduction in the transfer above the more market steps that we've been doing over the last couple of years, then you know what the universe is with respect to the options that you have. Lastly, with respect to the transfer, and what I appreciate Mr. Zavos' comment. That's the first time that I've heard him say, presume that the transfers are lawful under the charter, presume that these things are happening as a matter of course. Let's just talk about the policy of it, the policy wisdom of continuing to make those transfers. That is a discussion and debate certainly that we can have. The answer to that particular question, however, goes back to the original statement that the council has considered that. The council has weighed that and said, well, when you consider what we receive as a function of the property tax dollar that's paid, we get 13.5 cents versus other cities get significantly more. We are a bedroom community. We have 10% of our available land is for commercial and industrial. 85% is for residential. So our sales tax generation is going to be pretty much kind of what it is. And when you look at all of the other barriers that exist for us raising new revenues, we have grown around the GWP transfer. So unless we're willing to cut 40 police officers and 40 firefighters and a very significant portion of all of our quality of life services, or keep whole police and fire and eliminate entirely the public or the library, arts and culture department, and entirely the community services and parks department, and entirely the finance and or management services operations, well, then you're not going to get $20 million worth of savings, especially after you've cut $18 million 2 years ago, $15 million this last year, and we ended up this year flat. No new revenue, no new cut. Again, the idea, my point, maybe I'm making it, to the point ad nauseum, is that all the easy things have been done. Anything that could have been done pretty much has been done, except raise the rates, which is indisputably not occurred on the base rates over the last 5 years. We've done everything else. So certainly the commission is free to make advice to council on anything from your suggestions on the transfer, your suggestions on the reserve levels, the amount for the bond issue. But at the end of the day, you know that those chickens are all coming home to roost.
I have a question for you. Going back to the low income discount program, with the scenario keep whole option, that one we start with 1.4 million and then we go to negative 2 million, so that's like a difference of like 3.4 million. Earlier, Christine mentioned that the public benefits fund, right, would be negative, and as a result, the public benefits charge would be increased. How does that relate to your base scenario, the 87522?
The scenario that you see here, we could do that under 87522.
87522.
Well, I mean,
that's 25%. I'm talking about the keep whole option.
Oh, I'm sorry, keep whole option. I think this here is modeled around 87522. So, it is? Yes. So the idea is that the other scenarios, I would venture a guess that the other scenarios you fare a little bit better because it's a higher rate at the tail end of especially the 67544, probably mitigates that negative $2 million to a degree. Better anyway than 87522 does.
But what if we go with your base scenario, 87522, and then go with the keep whole option?
Then you
what
run
changes?
a negative $2 million number.
Well, it has to become a positive somehow.
Somehow.
So how would you do that?
If it is, in all candor, well, yeah, if it's the commission directing, then I would say I'll take recommendations back to the city council. If it's the council mandating, then I have to cut other services to the tune of $2 million. It could very conceivably or easily be, for purposes of GWP, cut the transfer by $2 million. Just cut it on an ongoing basis. You could do that, but then you got to find $2 million in the general fund somehow. And so
after 5 years.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you draw down, effectively.
As you draw down, yeah.
Because you will run negative somewhere in this area here.
And so the public benefits charge is already included in this 87522, is not an additional surcharge?
It is a surcharge, is it not?
It is an additional surcharge. Okay, and would you be recovering the negative $2 million with that charge?
No, you just continue, if left totally on its own on a geometric plane,
Right.
it runs continually negative,
Right.
more and more negative.
Okay. And
Because that cost recurs.
right, right. And I'm asking that, so at this time, you have no intention of recapturing that if we were to go with that scenario, increasing the public benefits charge?
If I heard the city attorney correctly, the charge itself remains static because it's grandfathered in under Prop
right.
26.
Oh, I see.
But
Okay.
the budget for public benefits that are typically funded by the charge could be adjusted through other sources of revenue. Is that correct?
Through other
Correct, thank you.
sources.
And
Okay.
because we couldn't allow it to run negative in this particular, we would ultimately have to cut something else to keep it at zero.
Right.
And as Craig was indicating, you need to have some cash balance in there to pay for the reimbursements as they come through.
And any effort to adjust the public goods charge would have to go before the voters
That's
as
true,
an
sir.
adjustment to a
Under
grandfathered
26.
tax under Prop 26.
Or you can just lower the reserve by $2 million and go about it that way, can you? Or no?
That's a good question.
You subsidize the public benefits charge with reserves, not without violating Prop 26.
Because it's a standalone.
You're subsidizing, and that's in violation of the proportionality
Okay.
requirement.
Okay. So the only way you can recover that $2 million would be to, cut costs in other areas.
Well, you would, yes, but it would be cut costs within your PBC budget, and other factors within your PBC budget are things like your energy efficiency programs or solar incentive programs. So you would essentially have to have wholesale reductions or eliminations of those programs to be able to absorb those increases.
Right. Anybody else? Any questions?
Yes, one other matter. So, Mr. Ochoa, would you address the assertion by one of the speakers, this concept of some type of a mechanism for increasing rates by a half a cent per year?
Yeah, on the adjustment rates. I don't know, Mike, do you want to answer that? Are you talking about the cap or the fact that the assertion that was made regarding all three of the adjustment charges?
I wasn't clear
Mike
on,
Bell
the,
is our
on the
consultant.
issue that was raised by our public speaker. So if you could address that, I'd appreciate it.
Mike Bell, consultant to the city. Let me see if I can answer, and if it's not clear, please follow up. The energy cost adjustment has a half-cent cap on it, which by our calculation would provide for somewhere in a 5 to 6% range should something happen with fuel prices or unit breakdown like what happened with San Onofre recently, that sort of thing. So it would be capped in any 1 year. Fact of the matter is, over the last 5 years, the equivalent fuel adjustment charge has been flat. And I think as the one chart showed, in the initial 2007, 2008, it went up, but in subsequent years, it went down and offset everything that had gone up in the first 2 years. I think given the market, the fact that there's abundant gas supply and that fuel prices have remained fairly stable, the likelihood of having that kind of an increase is low. The other charges, the regulatory charge, for example, would float depending upon legislation that could be passed by the state or federal government that would require, for example, investment in cleaning up existing coal facilities. That sort of thing. Some of the items that have been discussed in terms of regulatory requirements at the EPA. Now, I would say that over the next 5 years of this plan, the known costs have been built into that number. So included in the 87522 are the known regulatory charges that exist today and the compliance costs that the city would have to meet those. The only protection provided by this new charge would be for legislation that gets written from this point forward that would have an impact on the cost of the utility. So to the extent that those are out there, they're based on what we know today and what's been planned for the next 5 years. So to the extent that something changes, those costs could go up. Again, with regard to fuel, I think it's what we've seen in the recent past is those costs have been pretty stable, and I don't see a high likelihood that those would increase significantly.
So do have a follow-up question then. So on the low likelihood that, let's say, natural gas prices creep back up, then what are the checks and balances that are in place before? Are there checks and balances in place such that the city council or any other body would weigh in on an increase before it would go into an effect?
I would say the most immediate check and balance are the power resource and power supply people that look at the various alternative fuel sources and market purchases and so on. Obviously, if a certain fuel starts to become more expensive, more likely coal, the focus will be to move to a cheaper resource. So that's the immediate. After that, once the costs are incurred, should, say, fuel prices increase, then the rate would be adjusted based upon what those actual costs are. So you're basically looking at what those are, and in my opinion, the best way to mitigate that is active energy risk management, active portfolio management, and adjusting your purchases as the market prices change.
And if I can add to that, from a public transparency standpoint, the ordinance has a specific formula for calculating that adjustment charge, all of the adjustment charges actually, and any increase or decrease would have to be implemented in compliance with what that formula says. It's not just a number that gets pulled out of thin air. And those adjustable rates get posted on the Glendale Water and Power website. So it's very public, very transparent what the utility is doing with those adjustable rates.
Okay. Thank you both.
Can I come back to something from the chair? Is it your interest to recommend back to council something higher than what the recommendation is on the low-income discount program?
You're asking me?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm interested with the whole, the no increase, the whole concept that was described in here. Not any higher than that, but what was described here, the keep whole option.
But if the keep whole option puts us into the red rather dramatically, but for example, I mean, as I was talking with Mr. Elliott to see, and this we don't know, we'd have to model it for the council, but I want to make sure that this adds value to something that you were discussing. If you were to, right now we're proposing 11, 12, 1250, 1250, 13. If we were to move to something higher than 11, something higher than 12, and then perhaps stop at that point because the first 2 years of the proposed rate plan, regardless of the scenario, are the two highest years. So you would go to something north of what staff is recommending, beneath the keep whole option, and then allow kind of a glide down over 3, 4, and 5 because those rates start to come back to a more pedestrian, 5 to 2 scenario.
Well, I was also wondering, I know earlier, John, you mentioned the several other areas covered by the public benefits charge. Can you go over that list again in detail? What's included?
Sure. As a matter of fact, let me have Craig Cunin come up, who deals with this. This is his section. He knows this in detail.
We have a number of programs, energy efficiency programs or solar programs. We also have other low-income programs besides the discount program. We have a medical equipment program that provides monthly discounts from $5 to $50 a month for people with medical equipment. So if they have the oxygen canister that uses a lot of electricity, they get free electricity for that. We have a helping hand program that provides up to $150 in one-time bill assistance program, or if they need help on their deposit. So, and we, so we do have a number of different programs. I just maybe add something on the keep whole option. There's 12,000 people getting a discount right now. There could be as many as 18. You go from $10 a month to $22 a month, and that number goes from 12,000 to 18,000. We have no PBC programs other than the discount program. It's something to look at. We opened up the solar program on July 1st. We have $1.5 million in it. That was fully subscribed within 3 or 4 days. I mean, there's lots of other customers out there that use PBC money for, from business customers to regular non-low income customers that we won't have any programs for them. So it's just throw that out there.
Okay.
Did I answer your question? Or?
Okay, so there's no other way of increasing that pot of money because, yeah, we're tied to.
You could do a tax measure, but short of doing taking it out to a vote, you couldn't do it.
The amount of applications we'll get, if you start making that discount 40% of a bill, you're inviting, people to just apply for it that may not be eligible. So.
And how big a portion is the admin cost in that?
I'd have to go back and check, but normally it's been around 10%, and it's been around there for the 14 years that I've been here.
Okay, thank you.
The eligibility for that program is the CPUC's guidelines, correct? It's the CPUC's
Yes, the income eligibility guidelines, we use the CPUC guidelines, the same as Edison and the gas company uses. And if you look at the chart, they provide 20%. We're providing 25%. So compared to the other utilities, I think, it's...
Okay.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Do you have any other comments? Before, I would like to hear each commissioner's recommendation, if that's okay with everyone. And then we'll see what the majority vote is, or how do you want to do it?
I wasn't present, so excuse me. Did you guys have a general discussion about the overall program, or before my arrival, after the presentation?
Yeah, I can't recall when you showed
No,
up, but no.
there was not.
No, there was not. Okay.
So it's either keeping it at 87522 or one of the alternative scenarios, or we can even say no increase, postpone. Okay?
And to be clear, the staff's recommendation is to stay with the 87522. Is that correct?
Right. Who would like to go first?
Well, actually, I would like to just make some comments since I wasn't here.
Okay.
When looking at the current financial statements and the financial status of GWP, I think from a business perspective, it's ludicrous to have a reserve where we are, given the size of our utility, given the potential disaster that can happen, natural or infrastructure. I think we absolutely need to have an increase. I think where I have an issue and where the public has an issue is what happens after 5 years. Are we going to come back to this again and be faced with, okay, well, now other things are happening and we need to have an increase again. Granted, we have a new city manager, we have a new general manager for GWP, and I think they've all done a great job in whether it's cutting budgets or whether it's cutting operational staff and whatnot. A few questions. First of all, I think one of the public speakers mentioned that over the next 5 years, something near $220 million in additional revenue will come to the city. Is that an accurate number, fairly accurate number?
The number that we had was 164. Is that right? That's the $164 million? Including the bond? Okay.
So minus the bond, 164.
That's, yes.
What percentage of that money, I think if we were to break it down into some major costs, whether it's the reserve, whether it's infrastructure, what percentage of their costs are going towards the reserve? What percentage or what amount is going towards is going towards infrastructure. Can we go to that slide? Do we have that slide today?
This is it right here, yeah? I can, right, so if you can see here, this line here,
right,
the triangle, that's the reserve line as it tracks going. So right now, today, or I'm sorry, here we are, that's 47.
Right.
And you can see we're pushing it up to, I think that's 81, 94, something, and then 114 at 0.4. So you can follow that curve as we move ahead. Still not at the 124 level, but approaching it.
Right. So 114 minus 47, roughly we have about, what, 70 million of that money or so going towards reserves? Okay. Of the 165. The remaining 90 or so thousand is going towards.
You see us going back to positive net income.
Right.
And you see us developing a pay-go capacity here, so that by the time we're done doing all of the infrastructure work that Ramon Waig and all his people are looking at, and then the PM work, not the repowering, but the PM work at Grayson, we will be in a position here to begin spending cash on hand for capital investment. Okay. Which times nicely with interest rates crawling back up, where a bond is not nearly as attractive as what it might be today.
Okay. So I think where I'm going with this is the following. There's a fairly large size of this, size of this revenue is going towards certain fixed or one-time costs. Is that correct?
Which one are you talking about?
Well, the reserve, for example. I mean, once we get the reserve back up to 100, I mean, why are we increasing it? I mean, yeah, we have a 29% cumulative increase, right? And then after that point, that same revenue will be coming into the city. Yet a big portion of those additional revenues was to fill a reserve fund. So that money will be back in the reserve, and certain other capital expenditures would also have been made. I think there was a modernization for 11 million from the previous presentation. So my point is, and this may add some complexity to this, or it may not be popular, but why not after 5 years drop that rate where it needs to be to keep positive operations, fund, pay-go? But why are we still, and to the benefit of the city, I think it'll show good faith to the public that, hey, you know what, we're where we need to be, and we're going to keep the operational cost where it is today. I mean, it's just an idea, and I think we should talk about it.
How would that impact those percentages, what you're suggesting?
Not those.
Yeah. You're talking about afterwards.
I'm saying we need to have that. We need to be the position where.
I think what you'll see, and to Commissioner Ajemian's question, this curve, once you get, presume for the sake of argument that we keep the policy what it is, and it doesn't increase in the future years. This curve that you see here, the reserve curve, it just flattens out. So we're not adding any new rate dollars in future years towards that reserve. Mike, do you want any context?
That's actually a very good question, and it goes to the heart of the design behind this plan. The plan is structured such that in the first 3 years, all of the utilities' capital improvements will be paid for out of the bond. So the $60 million bond issue will fund all the capital improvements for the first 3 years. During the first 3 years, as the rates ratchet up, the reserve accounts are replenished. In the fourth and fifth year, the reserve accounts are basically leveling off, as Mr. Ochoa said, and there's $30 million a year in years 4 and 5 that will fund capital improvements beyond what was issued in the bonds. So this plan basically replaces the capital improvements that need to be made, replaces the reserve accounts, gets the net income up to a positive level in a 5-year period of time. There's no windfall or or drop-off after that point in time. That's the theory behind this is you then go to, rather than waiting 4 or 5 years to change rates, annual increases of maybe 2% or some way to cover inflationary costs going forward. And so the structure of this plan was devised so that the capital improvements can be made, the reserves can be replenished, the net income can be restored to a positive level, and then in future years, there's much smaller rate changes.
In future years 4 and 5.
In future years,
six, seven,
and 8.
6, 7, and 8.
So, yeah. after
And
you
in
get out of the
fact,
hole,
4 and 5 are planned at 2%. So really, the biggest bang for the buck is if the first 3 years, get that bond issue done, get the reserves back to where they need to be, and start ongoing pay-go capital funding, and then from that point forward, have much smaller increases.
Our fear has been that if we would do this kind of course correct as quickly as we can, and that's why the test that you see, or a series of tests that you see on the right-hand side, what animates the staff's recommendation versus any of the other alternatives is just that it's sooner. The sooner we can course correct, the sooner we can do all of these things, such that if we did not, if we instead said, well, let's kind of take a much more middle-of-the-road type of increase strategy, we think that the costs going forward are actually more expensive because we're deferring more. It's taking longer to get that done, as opposed to making the adjustment as quickly as we can, pivoting, and then getting to a much more pedestrian level of increases going forward.
I agree with the course correction. I think we definitely need to get to a proper balance with reserves and net income. Again, I'm just, and I guess we don't have all the numbers here, or, if years 1 to 3 is to replenish the reserve, and 4 and 5 we start funding, $30 million each for infrastructure or whatnot. Are we then planning every year we're going to be spending $30 million or so plus on infrastructure? Is that, do we have a 10-year kind of a plan? Is that something that planned out? Do we have any idea what happens 6 through 10?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. We have a long laundry list of things that we need to get done.
Yeah, good afternoon, Ramona Bueg, Assistant General Manager. Yeah, we actually have a long-term plan. We divided into what we call a gold plan and a bronze plan. We're looking up until 2027 to get all our infrastructure upgraded and done. With this is what we call the bronze plan. Actually get us further than 2027 with the $30 million. Back in the days when we're fixing things and things were falling apart, we're spending easily just on the electric side, without the power plant, $45 million a year. So this is a very conservative to make sure that we address all the things that need to get done so it doesn't create a reliability or stability issue.
Thank you.
I have a question on labor costs.
Yes, ma'am.
Are we keeping labor costs constant percentage?
God willing, the river don't rise. That's
Okay.
the attitude.
Or go down? Yeah.
We are not looking at making wholesale increases in the number of our bodies. We shared last time we're at the lowest level of full-time staff since the mid-1990s. And when you consider that the rank-and-file employees have not had that salary increase, save fire, which has kicked back a increase that they were due for a series of years, I just don't see labor growing in the way that it did in the 90s or even early 2000s. Much though my wife wishes it was, it just isn't going to happen. I can tell you that we are negotiating with our employees, and you'll be relieved, I'm certainly relieved to see how conscientious, I think is the right word, they are with respect to understanding where the city is, where the community is, and what their role is in making sure we're balanced.
Okay, yeah, I just want to make sure that we cover that so our audience know that there's not a dramatic increase in what we're proposing going to labor.
There's no assumed large increases.
I'm sorry?
There's no assumed large increases
Right.
within the 5-year plan.
Okay.
And if I might, just to kind of drive that point home a little bit more, I think it's important also to note that within the last 2 years, we've had significant reductions within the department. 84 employees, roughly about a 20% reduction to the tune of about $11.1 million in savings. So after that, we still aren't planning on any major increases.
Okay. Well, Commissioner Jamian expressed his thoughts. I want to go next. I understand the importance of the rate increase, and we've discussed it several times now. We've looked at different scenarios. As all of you notice, I was really focusing on the whole the low income, how do you call it, the keep whole option. But I do understand that we'd have to sacrifice a lot of the other very, very important programs as well. So this is what I would propose, and depending on the rest of the commissioners, it may or may not go. I would like to propose go with the scenario that the staff is recommending, the 87522, and also the low-income discount program with the 25% discount throughout. So, which means the number changes depending on their bill, the 25%. So I know you mentioned that is doable, and we are still in positive at the end doing this, the 25%?
Yes, ma'am. Just as we were going back and forth, I want to make sure that we are clear. This would be these are fixed dollar amounts representing an average 25% discount, as opposed to a 25% discount.
What I'm proposing is like, okay, for instance, if the bill is $100, probably won't be that high. I'm proposing a fixed 25% discount. Is that not what you're saying?
I'd have to defer to legal if we could do. Right now, it's a fixed dollar. Could we convert to percentage?
We could convert to percentage because you're adjusting the PBC budget. You're not doing a rate increase. And the way that provision is currently drafted in the code, you have the flexibility to allocate any amount to any of those categories of funds that are designated. I just don't know that we've studied the rate impact, though, of doing that. I mean, the budget impact of doing that.
I just would like to add that if you go to a 25%, then there will be a significant number of people who will see a reduction in their current discount, because we'd have to go to 25% of the bill. So if your bill was less than the
how about 25% minimum 10?
We'd have to check our billing system and see. I mean, we went to this rate because we wanted to encourage people who would save energy, wouldn't see their discount reduced because they had done that. That's why we went to a strict dollar amount. And that's why I think Pasadena did that too, is a flat dollar, you save energy, you still get your $10, or you still get your $11, or your $12. Just a thought.
So you'd have to configure your billing system, let's say in 2015, to take out $12 from a bill that's $47.
Yes, right now it's coded as a flat $10. Assuming all this gets passed, and we would change that from 10 to 11 this year. Next July 1st, we would change it to $12, and so on.
So in fiscal year 2015, let's say, the low-income amount, if that turns out to be $75, you're just taking $12 off that bill.
They get the $12, yes. That's how it's been for 14 years, basically. And I just wanted to mention that, you start reducing somebody's discount, there's a considerable number of people out there that are going to not be happy with that.
Maybe what we could do to get, because I think I know where you want to be in terms of representing what the value would be to the customer, would be to set it as a dollar amount, but before the end of each year, come back to commission and see if that dollar amount, on average, needs to be ratcheted up or ratcheted down to achieve the 25% in a way that does not that does not negatively impact or unfairly impact those folks that are doing a good job with conservation. That way they still realize the benefit. I mean, certainly it's within Commission's purview to give that advice on a regular annual basis about what this number should be. For purposes of the rate plan, we'd like to know what the theme seems to be, and the theme seems to be 25%, but distributed in an equitable way that kind of confers the benefit on folks that are conserving. Does that make sense?
Yeah. My whole thing is that I want to really provide relief for this whole class. And that's why I looked at the whole option where, keep whole option. But we can't seem to go that way. Okay, so then what's next? The one after that is the 25% discount. However, your system has to be designed to get as close as possible to the 25%. That's fine.
I think coming back on the annual basis is probably the best way to do it. I mean, do you see any problem with that, Christine?
No, I don't. In fact, the PBC budget is typically a separate agenda item, and we could certainly bring that to this commission for your recommendation.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, well, I finished with my suggestion.
I would second that if so moved for on the public goods charge, public benefits charge.
And how about the scenario?
I would actually concur in going for the 87522 scenario as well, if only for the reason that the deviation in each rate class is no higher than 0.3% different than the alternative one scenario, and you're not, sort of spreading the pain over more years. And you also end up with $114.4 million in reserve instead of $104.6, which ends up benefiting the ratepayers in the end with lower costs for borrowing, potentially marginally lower.
Okay.
Thank you. I'll go. So I would support the need for the course correction. That I think that makes sense. As a Glendale resident, I don't look forward to paying more myself on my electric bill. So among the various scenarios here, alternate number one feels closest, but as Commissioner Matt says, you wind up long-term without the type of revenue that you get from scenario number one. I would suggest that we could consider some caveats, though, that go along with support of the scenario recommended by staff, and that is to submit a recommendation along with the thought of reviewing what some of the variables are. So we have talked about a number of items here, right, that should be considered in context. Those include issues like the size of the reserve fund. I think we need a reserve fund. If it has not been reviewed since 2006, which was indicated earlier, then that seems like an opportunity to review the size of the reserve fund and what is covered in the reserve fund. So that would be one potential caveat. A second would be to review the transfer, and specifically, to my mind, the size of the transfer relative to other similar utilities. And so, can I pause there? Is the staff aware in terms of the percentage? I think with the current budget, we're moving 13% of.
If you look at GWP total, we're at 9.6% of all operating revenues. We don't transfer water anymore. However, I would still recommend that you look at the full utility, because the utilities that we compete of, municipal utilities, they still transfer water revenues. And so I want to say Burbank is at 5%. Pasadena is a little bit higher than that. And I'm not sure about LADWP.
No, LADWP does not. Not water, yeah. And they transfer 8%.
8% of electric?
Electric. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So We are at, I think, 11.5 to 12 on electric. 12.2. So, as I say, our plan right now is a glide down to 9%. Then that's council adopted policy vis-a-vis their budget and 5-year financial forecast.
And do we get there within the 5-year period?
No.
So it's more like 10 years.
Effectively, yeah. If with a windfall of general fund revenues, you would get there sooner because we would pull back away from the transfer sooner. But on the continuing marginal recovery, we get there, I want to say, short of 10. But the council is looking to go in that direction already.
Okay. Okay, so that's probably been adequately addressed. The third potential caveat that I was going to mention would be a review of this concept of whether Glendale belongs in the electric utility business. As Mr. Ochoa, you stated at the outset, it seems to me that either we investigate that and study it, or we remove it from our vernacular if that's not something that we're serious about considering.
My sense is that we'll have an answer to that question as early as tomorrow night. I really do.
So thank you. In the end, I do support the concept of the, as proposed by staff, 87522. But I would just ask my fellow commissioners whether you'd feel comfortable entertaining any type of caveats, whether it's that would go along with the recommendation from the commission, or if we want to keep it cleaner and simply make the when we haven't voted on a recommendation. But the concept of caveats, I suppose, is what I would ask for any discussion on.
I would support those, and I would also add one that we include in our advice to council that there be a consideration of using the increased UUT revenues that we anticipate from utility users tax revenues that we anticipate from the rate increases to wean the city off the transfer to the extent possible in a revenue neutral way that doesn't jeopardize city services, parks, libraries, police, fire, but that maybe accelerates the notion of reducing that transfer.
I concur with our fellow commissioners here, and given the scenarios presented, if we're going to go with a pay-go structure, if we have to get our reserves up, I mean, what other scenario really makes sense? I mean, if we're going to do this thing, let's do it right one time and not come back after 3 years or 4 years and second or third reserve. My only or additional caveat I would say is the following. I mean, 5 years is a long time. What happens if 5 years later the council or somehow we decide that we're not going to make the transfer anymore? I mean, it's not our decision. We have no part in this. This is council that's making the decision. But in that scenario, then you have an additional $20 million, pretty much, that is going towards or additional revenue that's in GWP. What happens, to the rates? What happens to the overall rate structure? I mean, that's a question that we can't really talk about, but it's something that should be addressed.
In that happy occasion, if that were to happen somewhere in the next 5 years, what you would see is in the next rate plan, in years 6, 7, 8, and going forward, is the cost of service analysis would reflect the alleviation of that burden on GWP. So in terms of the concern that you had about ensuring years 6, 7, 8, and on are 2, 1, maybe 0% increases, not because the economy, not because of the will isn't there, not being there to make those increases, but because the costs are in alignment, it would be reflected in that COSA at that future time.
Right. I mean, it's just it's human nature. When there's money, you spend it, regardless whether you're an individual business, whether you're a city, wherever you are. So you're trying to put certain, I guess, guidelines in place that when that money is available, So are you planning on looking at this, I guess, 5 years from now? Who knows, right? Who knows what happens?
We have to do a COSA anytime we set those rates, and all of that is going to be a factor. Whether it's the charter, rather the charter allowed transfer is increased or decreased, that will all be part of it.
Then, as I said before, if we're going to have a pay-go structure, if we're going to have to get our reserves back up, we have to I mean, I think we have to go ahead with the city proposed plan and leave the county to decide.
Okay, so I think we're all in agreement. We're going with staff's proposal, 87522. Now, there were quite a few caveats that were brought up. So how should we do this?
So at this point, we need to entertain a motion, and it would have to come from someone other than you, Commissioner Chan, as you're sitting as chair today, unless you wanted to pass the gavel. So we'd like to have someone make a motion, have it seconded, and then we'll vote on it.
How about if I try? To
Please.
recap help me out if I inaccurately recount the caveats. So motion is that this commission supports the staff recommendation of a rate increase over 5 years of 8%, 7%, 5%, 2%, 2%, with the following caveats that the commission would urge the City Council to explore. And those are, number one, to review the cash reserve for the Glendale Department of Water and Power. Number two is to consider whether a study should be done about whether Glendale belongs in the electric utility business. Number three is to review the utility user tax and any changes that would be appropriate based on that.
Changes in the reserve, or I'm sorry, changes in the transfer to offset by UUT growth. Right.
And I think, anything further?
Reasonably, that's it.
So that would be the motion.
Second.
Okay, all say aye?
Oh, can we have one more, which is to maintain the 25% subsidy for low income?
That's right.
As a fixed dollar amount, but tracking as closely as possible to 25% of a bill reduction.
As a fourth caveat.
Catch.
Okay, so
So do you accept that fourth, just as a formality, you're okay with that fourth addition to your motion?
as a fourth addition to the motion.
I'm sorry, the maintaining the 25% subsidy, or as I guess, as we discussed previously, have that brought to you for your consideration, and with the goal of keeping it at 25%.
Do you want to include that in your motion, or do you want me to make it as a separate motion?
Let's include it.
As long as the mover is fine with that.
Yeah.
I'm perfectly
Movers.
Yes, I'm fine with that.
Well, then let's take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries.
Thank you. Okay. Next item, please.
Or reports. A, Public Health Goal Report. Ramona Boyd.
Good evening. Ramona Boyd, Assistant General Manager. Tonight we'll be presenting to you the public health goal performance that we have. If you didn't know, that's a requirement by the California Department of Public Health that every 3 years we provide a public report, a public hearing with respect to our performance. So with that, the person that's doing the actual reporting to you is our Water Quality Manager, James Saenz. And he's the one closest and is very familiar with the different contaminants that we have to report to the California Public Health. So with that, James.
Thank you, sir. Commission, ladies and gentlemen, I'm James Saenz, Senior Environmental Program Specialist, and I'm here to present the 2013 Public Health Goals Report. Now, the purpose of the report, in compliance with Health and Safety Code, the public health goals are required of systems that have greater than 10,000 service connections. And these public health goals are submitted in a written report every 3 years. They identify each contaminant detected exceeds a public health goal. They disclose the numerical public health risk. They identify the category of the risk to the public, and it describes the best available technology to reduce those levels. They also are developed using toxicology data that they obtain through scientific literature. In compliance with the public health goals, there actually is no compliance. Public health goals are not an enforceable level. It's a health-based goal obtained or established by the California Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. These goals are not maximum contaminant levels. They're not MCLs. They are a part of a process in developing the MCLs. So public health goals are basically the first step in developing an MCL. And in that process, the state of California, the health department, they try to set these MCLs, these maximum goals, as close as they can to the public health goals. Now, in this presentation, I'd just like to highlight some areas of just the constituents that were detected above the public health goals. A more detailed report has been submitted and is online at the GWP website with greater detail on what each contaminant is, how best technology is to remove it, and the cost of those to remove those contaminants. First, like to discuss total coliform. Now, if you see down here, it says MCLG. MCLG is kind of what I like to think of as a federal PHG. It stands for maximum contaminant level goal. It's used the same as a PHG. When contaminants have no PHG, they refer to the federal goal, the MCLG. Now, coliform bacteria is an indicator of organisms and aren't generally considered harmful. In 2011, there were between 148 and 185 samples collected each month. And in 2011, the highest percentage of samples positive were at 2.5%, meaning in that 1 month, 2.5% of the samples came back present for total coliform. Now, the MCL is 5%, 2.5% being well below 5%. Next, I'd like to discuss and show you the inorganic contaminants that were detected above the PHG levels. As you can see, the PHG for arsenic is 0.00000 or 0.00004 milligrams per liter. Milligrams per liter is equivalent to parts per million. At Glendale sources, we see a fluctuation of various levels of arsenic well below the MCL of 0.01 milligrams per liter. And for nickel, PHG, we're showing at 0.012. We have a level just above the PHG coming out of the Glendale water treatment plant. Again, well below the MCL of 0.1 milligrams per liter. Now I'd like to show you nitrate. Nitrate, MCL, and PHG levels are at the same, at 45 milligrams per liter. Glendale has two sources that are well above that MCL. Now what we have established is an approved blending plan, meaning these sources are blended with water that we purchase from Metropolitan Water and analyzed daily for nitrate. Now this average blend of the water brings that nitrate level down to well below the MCL at around 13 milligrams per liter.
So, question, Mr. Zine. So, that water from Glorieta and Foothill Wells is not delivered prior to blending to residents of Glendale, is that correct?
That's correct, sir. These two sources are sent to a reservoir that is blended with metropolitan water. That water in that reservoir is then analyzed daily, and we keep that blending percentage pretty steady to maintain this lower level. Next, lead and copper. Actually, lead was not detected above the pHG, but lead and copper kind of go together. Every 3 years, Glendale Water and Power does a sampling for lead and copper. These samples are taken from homes within Glendale Water and Power's service area. These homes must meet a criteria. They must be built before 1982. They must not have been repiped with copper-free lead and copper-free solder. They must not hold any type of or maintain any type of treatment system inside their home. These homes are then sampled for lead and copper and are reported at a 90th percentile, and they're given out as an action level. Now, an action level is a level that determines if there's treatment needed. So with respects to copper, just above the pHG limit of 0.3 at 0.43, and the action level is 1.3 parts per million milligrams per liter. And as you can see at our sources, there is no detected copper in GWP source water. So next I'd like to talk about some of the organics that we found within our source water. Trichloroethylene, or TCE, was detected at a Foothill well right at the pHG limit of 0.0017 milligrams per liter, well below the MCL of 0.005. Tetrachloroethylene, or PCE, pHG is 0.0006 milligrams per liter. As you can see, the three areas that we detected it above the pHG limit were Glorieta, Verdugo Park Water Treatment Plant, and Foothill Wells, still well below the MCL 0.005. Next, I'd like to show you the radionuclides. Now, radionuclides are given in picocuries per liter. And again, gross alpha uses the MCLG, which is the federal pHG. And all the sources detected still well below the MCL, but above the MCLG of 0. Gross beta, again, no pHG, but MCLG at 0. Well below the level of the MCL of 50 picocuries per liter. Now, uranium, pHG 0.43. We had detections at all our sources above 0.43, again, well below the MCLs of 20 picocuries per liter. Radium-228, pHG 0.019. Detection at Glorieta wells and Foothill wells, well below the MCL of 5 picocuries per liter. Now, a detailed report is on our website. which goes into a little more detail about cost for removing or bringing these levels down lower. Just a small description of the types of technology that's out there to bring these levels down. Total coliform, really the easiest way is to just maintain a chlorine residual throughout the system. GWP, we monitor chlorine residual daily, whether it be in the distribution system, in our storage tanks. We maintain a residual by boosting chlorine throughout the system. And that's something that we stay on top of to maintain. Arsenic, nickel, really all the organic or inorganic compounds, reverse osmosis is the technology that's better suited to remove those. Copper, again for the action level associated with copper, those levels are established based on optimizing your corrosion control. So for treatment technologies to reduce copper or lead within your homes would be to monitor to see how corrosive your water is. Based on samples collected at our source waters, determine that Glendale reaches optimized corrosion control, and there's no need for any other treatment to reduce copper or lead within our system. For inorganic or for organics, TCE and PCE, granular activated carbon, and for radionuclides, reverse osmosis.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, ma'am.
You might have gone over this already, but I was flipping from page to page here. The nitrate, the MCL versus PHG nitrate. The Glorieta and Foothills, they're higher than both the MCL and the PHG. You might have mentioned what are the action items for that, or what are we doing? Those are both higher. The Glorieta wells and the Foothill wells are higher than the MCL and the PHG for nitrate?
Yes. For these two sources, GWP has established a blending plan. What we do is we take these sources, they're pumped to a reservoir where that water is then blended with metropolitan water, reducing the nitrate levels down. Those waters are monitored daily for nitrate, and as you can see here, that average blend brings that nitrate level down to 13 parts per million or milligrams per liter.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question for you, if I may.
Yes, sir.
So there are a few different areas where we are above the public health goal, but below the maximum contaminant level. So in those cases, what is the staff's position on those contaminants? That is to say, are we continuing to work on that, or do we feel comfortable that we're simply below the MCL?
With respect to the PHG and the MCL, again, PHGs are not enforceable, but they are a level that's looked at when establishing an MCL. They're levels, in my opinion, that they keep them down so low to keep awareness. They're levels that are established. For example, if you were to drink 2 liters of water containing one of the contaminants, let's say arsenic, at the PHG level for 72 years, drink 2 liters of water every day for 72 years, there's a 1 in 1 million chance that you would be diagnosed with cancer. That's how low these PHG levels are set. It's right at that level where you start to see an adverse effect. Now with the MCL is established where if you were to consume water at that level, that drinking it in excess of the MCL would create an adverse effect right away.
Okay, so follow-up question. I think what I hear you saying is that just because something like, let's say, uranium in Glendale is above the public health goal, I hear you saying that that's not necessarily a health risk because we're still below the MCL. But my question is whether or not having something like uranium above the public health goal means that we have an action plan in order to reduce it. Or are you saying because the health risk is so minimal that there is no action plan?
Yes. Well, because the PhD goal is so minimal, there isn't an action plan. But as to stay aware of this, we continue to monitor the water to show that these levels don't change. So with respects to PhD, it is a level that does not require us to take any action, and we don't until it reaches that level, that MCL.
Also, the other point to consider once we start going down to the PhD, I mean, that's the most recent one we're dealing with Chrome 6. Chrome 6, as you recall, has a PhD of 0.02. MCL hasn't been established. The current MCL is for total chrome at 50 parts per billion, but the public health goal was set at 0.02. The difference between the two is to get to 0.02, the cost will be incrementally impossible, that at some point our ratepayers will have to pay for the cost of treating water that, like you said, it takes somebody 70 years to drink 2 liters a day for it to have a detrimental effect on their health. So when we are considering PhD, meeting PhD versus MCL, we're also looking at what technology is available and at what cost. What are we willing to pay to get down to a level that may not be very reasonable? Okay.
Commissioner Chan, if I may, this question actually came up a couple of years ago when I was asking the same questions, trying to figure out the difference between an MCL and a PhD, and it was a very similar explanation that we got from state officials on this. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, there might be a memo that was drafted by, we might have a memo that explains this in a little bit more detail. I'd be happy to pass along to you. But it does come down to what's reasonable and attainable in certain circumstances. At this point, there isn't any technology that we're aware of. As a matter of fact, we're the leaders in the industry with respect to chromium-6 and the ability to remove chromium-6 from the water sources. Having a public health goal as low as what Mr. Abueg stated is one thing. Being able to attain that goal with today's technology is a complete other. There's a number of factors that have to be taken into consideration, and these are the same factors that some of these public health agencies take into consideration when they're determining what the MCLs are as well. So if it pleases the Commission, we'd be happy to see if we can dig up that memorandum and send it over to the Commissioners so we can get a better understanding of how this is all set. And if we don't have one, we'll develop one.
Okay, that sounds good.
That's actually in the report that was submitted to the California Department of Public Health back in February, which I believe we gave each one of you a copy. Those that were here, I forget who was here in February. So we can revisit that and highlight that for you.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay. No other questions? No? Thank you so much for your presentation. Next item, please.
4B, response to grand jury from City Attorney's Office. Christine Godinez.
Good afternoon, Commissioners and staff. I'm Christine Godinez, Senior Assistant City Attorney. And a while back, this commission had requested that we provide to you a report regarding a report by the civil grand jury, the Los Angeles County Civil Grand Jury, with respect to the transfer. And we're here today to provide that report to you. Just by way of background, this all came about in about October of last year. Our office was approached by the civil grand jury who inquired about the transfer of funds from our water and electric utilities to the general fund because of a complaint they had received regarding that and concerns about its legality under the California Constitution. So we met with the civil grand jury and provided information to them, including legal memoranda regarding our position both under Prop 26 and Prop 218 regarding the transfer, and advised them that in April we would be seeking to put a measure on the ballot to clarify the language in our charter with respect to the general fund transfers. And the grand jury advised that they would just take note of that. They would watch and see what the election results were, and that, as is their standard process, they'd be issuing a report in June, a final report. And so, much to our surprise, a report was issued in late March, just on the eve of the city election, which was an interim report which states that the city was in violation of the Constitution for transferring water and electric revenue. So the crux of the report was that we violate both Proposition 218 and Prop 26. And under the law, a response is required to a grand jury report, and that response must be approved by the governing body. So on June 11th, the city attorney's office took a proposed response to the city council, and the city council approved that response. That response has now been issued to the grand jury, and the ultimate effect is that when the final report is published, the response of the city, as well as any other investigations, and the grand jury does many investigations over the course of its year of service, all of the reports and the responses from the various public entities that were investigated is produced and published. So the civil grand jury had 3 findings and 3 recommendations in their analysis. And the 3 findings, I'd just like to go through them and what the city's response was. The first finding was that the city argues that Proposition 218 and 26 do not apply. And we were very surprised by this finding, if you can call it a finding, because that was not the city's position. The city never took the position that Proposition 218 and Proposition 26 don't apply. In fact, as I stated, we had provided the grand jury with copies of our legal memoranda where we discussed both of those propositions, and as well as a copy of a city council report and a resolution of the city council wherein the transfer of revenue from the water utility to the general fund was discontinued back in 2011. So the city no longer transfers any revenue from the water utility except to the extent that it's cost-based in compliance with Prop 218. Regarding Prop 26, we also provided legal memoranda on our opinion on that, as well as PowerPoints from previous commission and council presentations with regard to that issue, wherein we described how Proposition 26 applies to an electric rate increase, and our position that any electric rate or any transfer that predates the effective date of Proposition 26, which is November 3rd of 2010, anything that predates that for a local government is grandfathered and therefore is not subject to the voter requirements of Proposition 26. So we went through that in some detail with the grand jury, but that didn't make its way into the final report. So in our response that we've provided to the grand jury on that first finding, that we have argued that Prop 218 and 26 do not apply, we disagreed with that finding. The second finding was that the City of Los Angeles lost in court, making a similar argument as Glendale, and that this is indicative of the trend in interpreting by courts and interpreting Proposition 26. And in the response approved by the City Council, we also disagreed with that finding. The City of Los Angeles decision pertained to a transfer of water revenue to the general fund under Proposition 218. Proposition 218, by its terms, expressly does not apply to electric rates or to electric transfers, and we disagree that that case is indicative of the trend in interpreting Proposition 26. With regard to Proposition 26, we agree that electric rates have to be based on the cost of service, and in fact, that's why we've done a COSA, a cost of service analysis, with respect to the proposed electric rate transfer that we just discussed. And as we discussed with the grand jury, there's in fact just one case out there right now on this issue of Prop 26, and that case, at least at this point, is supportive of Glendale's position. We've talked about that case with previous commissions, or with the commission about a year ago. What that is a case out of the City of Reading, and in that case, the City of Reading had a transfer requirement that predated Proposition 26. It was enacted in the 1980s and had stayed on the books since prior to and then after Proposition 26 became effective in November of 2010. And about a month after Proposition 26 was enacted, the City of Reading increased their electric rates. And they got challenged because that electric rate increase included that pre-existing transfer. And at the trial court level, the court held that the rate was not required to go out to a public vote, that the requirement of the transfer was pre-existing, and even as a component of a post-Prop 26 rate increase was grandfathered. That case is now on appeal. So we provided copies of the briefs and the opinions to the grand jury, but yet that was not discussed in the grand jury's opinion at all. So we disagreed with that finding with respect to the City of Los Angeles decision being indicative of the law in this area. The third finding was that fiscal challenges do not justify ignoring constitutional requirements. And with respect to that finding, we absolutely agree in principle with the statement that fiscal challenges do not justify ignoring constitutional requirements. We disagree with the implication that the City of Glendale is ignoring constitutional requirements. The water transfer, as I said, is no longer being implemented because of our concerns from a Prop 218 standpoint. So to the extent that it's not cost of service based, that there is no transfer on the water side. On the electric side, it's the city attorney's opinion that the transfer is grandfathered. It predates Prop 26's effective date, and that therefore no vote is required and it's compliant with the Constitution. So those were the three findings. And there were also three recommendations. The first recommendation was that the City of Glendale obtain an independent legal opinion from outside counsel specializing in municipal tax law regarding its compliance with Proposition 218 and 26. So regarding Proposition 218, as I've said a couple times now, we are no longer transferring revenue from on the water side except to the extent cost-based. Therefore, there's no legal opinion that should be necessary in that regard. With respect to Prop 26, the city has retained outside legal counsel to evaluate the electric rate increase and to ensure compliance with Prop 26. The second recommendation was that the City of Glendale hold a special election and obtain the authorization by 2/3 of those voting approving the utility rates charged by GWP and the transfer of funds from GWP to the city's general fund. And the position of our office and what was stated in the response to the grand jury is that no such election is required by California law. And this position is shared by the experts that we've consulted. Proposition 226, as I said, is not retroactive, and our transfer provision has been on the books in its current form since 1949. The third recommendation was that the City of Glendale consider alternative sources of revenue if it is unable or unwilling to obtain the requisite authorization of the city's voters, as suggested in the previous recommendation. And our response stated that we are always looking for alternative sources of revenue, both with respect to the general fund and the other city funds, but that it is our position, again, that no vote is required in order to increase electric rates or to transfer funds from Glendale Water and Power Electric to the general fund. And so, as I said before, the conclusion is that our response to the report will be written up and it will be published on the civil grand jury's website along with the civil grand jury's report. With that, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
What's the status of the litigation involving the City of Reading and their utility?
That's on appeal. So the arguments have not yet been held at the appellate level, but we are obviously very closely watching that litigation.
Any other questions?
One more question. When do you expect you've retained outside legal counsel for an opinion on Prop 26? When do you expect that?
Well, we've retained outside legal counsel to evaluate our electric rates, and they have been advising us every step of the way. We wouldn't be moving forward with a proposed electric rate increase if they weren't, on board with it being compliant with Proposition 26.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. No other comments? Okay, we do have a speaker. Actually, two. Mr. Herbert Milano.
Mr. Chen, now that we only have two speakers, are we still limited to 3 minutes?
Yes, yes. I made that announcement at the beginning. That applies to all of the speakers.
Okay. My name is Herbert Milano, Commissioners, and wanted to point out a couple of things. I have been following the activities of the City of Glendale, primarily the finances, for a good 13 years. The number of hours that I spent looking at the city's finances really goes into the hundreds, if not thousands of hours. And I never imagined, ever, that a city would violate consciously the state constitution and pretty much say, if you don't like it, sue us. That was a statement by David Weaver, the mayor of the city, about 2 months ago. The interpretations that are oftentimes given to us, as if they were gospel, when you look behind it and look at the data, find that oftentimes it's totally bogus, untrue, because they figure that nobody's going to check. There are very few people checking what the city council says, or for that matter, what I hear in these chambers very often by the city staff. There is a part of city governance that to me is just absolutely astonishing. That a city would take its own initiative to put before the voters a false document. That was the charter amendment that was presented to the voters. It was false. It was misleading in just about every way possible, and all you need to do is spend about an hour reading the city charter, especially when it came to this very the specifications when a transfer is allowed. They lied. And pretty much what the city is doing is saying, the city attorney now becomes your defense attorney. You can say do and everything, and that's the role of the attorney. Any individual can have access to a defense, irrespective of their status of culpability. The city uses our money, our tax money, our city staff, and basically use it against the public for one very important reason. Because of the effect of the ordinances that were passed concerning pensions in 2001 and the humongous impact that it has, it forces the city to go after the Glendale Water and Power and grab that money. And if the public looks and sees items and ordinances that are in violation of our own charter and in violation of the state constitution, what alternatives do we have other than hiring our own attorneys? And I did investigate. Even on Prop 218, the League of Cities on an annual basis gave a warning to all of the city managers who basically went out to those committee meetings, and if you look for those documents, you'll see that. They were not permitted to do it, yet they did it anyway, until we were ready to file a lawsuit. They did all the due diligence in order to file it, and there's still money that is still owed us, and the statute of limitation has not expired. When a city goes against the public, our only alternative is that avenue that we actually have today. And that's the unfortunate part of the city taking a defense against the public. This is the city government against the public.
Thank you. Next speaker, Mr. Harry Zavos.
My name's Harry Zavos, and having initiated the grand jury inquiry, let me say that I've never argued that the transfer electrical fees violate the Constitution. I have argued that they violate the city charter. I would like to make certain comments regarding Proposition 26. There is, let me put it this way, both in Article 13C as amended by Proposition 26 and Article 13D of the Constitution as amended by Proposition 218, essentially a rule of thumb to distinguish between a legitimate fee versus a tax is the following. Is the amount charged to the person only an amount necessary to defray the cost of providing a service or product to the person? If that's all it is, then it's not a tax. It doesn't have to go to a vote. If, in fact, it's more than that, it becomes a tax and has to go to a vote. And I've asked Mr. Milano to fax to you or to send to you on email Article 13C so you have it in front of you. And Section 1 essentially makes that point. The question of the transfer goes not to the question of, it goes merely to the question of, is it a tax or a fee? The fact that $21 million is being used for other than providing the service for which the fee is charged makes it a tax. Now, once it's a tax, it is true. It doesn't grandfather everything. Proposition 26, it simply provides in Section 2 the following. No local government may impose, extend, or increase any special tax unless and until that tax is submitted to the electorate. Now, there's a difference between the fee collected, which is the tax, and once collected, how it's spent. Now, I've argued that the transfer can only come out of surplus. The city's taken a different position. They say it can be a budgeted obligation of the utility up to 25% of its operating revenue. For the moment, let's accept that. That only goes to how the fees are spent once collected. It doesn't go to whether the fee is increased. And you can't have a fee increase of 87522 and say it's not a fee increase. That is an increase in the fee, and that's precisely what Section 2, subsection D says. When that occurs, it's subject to a vote. It's the fee increase that is grandfathered in. That is, if there's no fee increase, Proposition 26 doesn't apply. It's not how those fees are spent once collected. The transfer goes to the question of whether it's a tax. It doesn't go to the question as to whether the fee is increased.
Thank you. Okay, no comments? Next item, please.
4C, renewable energy. Steve Lenz.
Madam President, members of the Commission, excuse me, Steve Lenz, Chief Assistant General Manager for Glendale Water and Power. I'm going to give you just a very quick update on where we are with our renewable energy compliance obligation. Many of you have seen this pie chart before in some of our introductory meetings and at past Commission meetings. This is a snapshot of our resource mix in calendar year 2012. And you can see here at the top is our renewable energy came in at 18.8% for that calendar year. And resources that contributed in calendar year 2012 to that resource mix include Ormat geothermal project, which we have down in southern area of California. It's geothermal. It's approximately 5% of our system. High Winds is a California project, which is wind, and that's about 2%. Pebble Springs is an Oregon project, which is wind. That's about 5%. Shoal Canyon Landfill, biogas, actually produces about 7% of our system. Pleasant Valley, Wyoming's wind comes in at about 2%. Tieton is a small hydro project up in Washington. That's about 2%. And then finally, at 0.04%, is local solar, and that's primarily a large solar project that we have at the Glendale Community College. And that adds up to more than this 18%, but of course those numbers vary with wind and water flows and things like that. I'm going to walk you through this slowly. On the left we have megawatt hours. This top line is pretty much our load for 2011 through 2020. And across the board, it's approximately 1.1 million megawatt hours. This line in the middle is our renewable resource obligation, and that's in terms of percentages. The right axis is percentages. For the first compliance period, we have to average 20% over 2011, 2012, and 2013. Then between 2014 and 2016, we step up to 25%. And between 16 and 20, we step up to 33%. This bottom line goes once again back to the left axis, which is megawatt hours of renewable energy we have to procure in each of those years. And so you can see here for compliance period 1, it's about 210, around 200,000 megawatt hours per year. And then once again it ratchets up towards the end of that compliance program. So we're focusing right now on that first compliance period. As I mentioned, we have to have an average of 20%. That's a little over 200,000 megawatt hours a year. And of that, approximately 600,000 megawatt hours, we are only short 20,000 megawatt hours. And the 20,000 megawatt hours we're short are already scheduled through the end of calendar year 13 and then some. So we anticipate that by the end of 13, we will be well within our compliance obligation and have probably about a 10% buffer that we will bank for future compliance periods. And I don't think I'm going to get into this detail, but there's several types of qualifying renewable energy, bucket 1, 2, 3. I'm probably not going to get into that other than to say that bucket 1 is right here in California connected to the first point of interconnection with the California Balancing Authority, and the others are pretty much out of the state. But as I mentioned, our short-term goal is to manage this existing portfolio with short-term purchases and our grandfathered resources and minimize cost. And we should have a small surplus. Looking into forward compliance periods, compliance period 2 and 3, we're working with SCAPA, or the Southern California Public Power Authority, to develop longer-term projects. And at the same time, as we move into those compliance periods, we'll scale in those projects and fill in where those projects don't cover with market purchases of bucket 1, 2, and 3 resources. Actually, to go back and answer Commissioner Chan's question from last meeting on cost, at 20%, I'm going to give you this in terms of millions of dollars per year. At 20%, which is basically right now, it costs us about $7.7 million per year to pay for that 20%. To go from 20% to 33%, that will cost us, on an annual basis, when we're at 33%, about an additional $5.5 million. So that'll be a total $13.2 million per year at 33%. That the cumulative amount, the lump sum to go from 20% to 33% between now and 2020 is about $20 million.
So that's with renewables going from 20 to 33, and then coal 22 to 0. And
well, no, right now we are working on reducing our coal obligations. We currently have a contract, and let me go back to this slide here. You see coal there is about 23%. Typically, we're more in the range of 35%, but we had some issues with some of our coal plants. San Juan was down because they had a coal fire. But we have contractual obligations at San Juan through 2027. I'm sorry, at San Juan, IPP through 2027, and San Juan beyond that. However, we are trying to negotiate an exit out of San Juan. We're hoping as early as 2017. And we're working on potentially repowering IPP with a non-coal resource by somewhere between 2020 and 2027. And the kind of the hypothetical repower there would be gas, but we're also looking at renewables. So between now and 2020, nothing in our modeling has coal gone. We're working on trying to negotiate exits, but all of our modeling right now includes coal. So what happens is, as we go from 20% renewables to 33%, this portion here, purchases, just shrinks. So instead of purchasing, we're replacing purchases with renewable energy. And if and when we do exit those coal projects, we'll replace that with something else. There may be more renewable mandates coming. We don't know.
Does 1368 mandate that we exit coal by 2027, or does that
No,
apply
no.
to
1368 only mandates that you can't invest in a capital project on a coal plant that will extend the useful life more than 5 years.
Right. More than 5.
So, San Juan is interesting because the useful life of San Juan, we're an owner, is actually about 2055. So if we negotiate an exit in 2017, we will be getting out very early on that. But it doesn't force you to exit coal. It just says that you can maintain it. You just can't extend the life beyond its design life.
Okay, so given those scenarios, is about $13 million per year. Okay. Thank you for the information.
Thank you.
Let's see, 4C. We do have one speaker. Mr. Harry Zavos, please.
Thank you, Commissioners. The reason I turned in that card is my understanding is that the city may be exiting from the contracts it has with coal-burning generating plants for power. And I understand that we're involved in a consortium involving the city of L.A. who wants to get off of coal-burning plants, convert them to natural gas by 2016. Now, that raises a real question for me because the rate increase that you folks have recommended includes within it a pass-through charge for compliance with the regulations. And so if we're talking about what the ratepayer is going to face, and we're talking about getting out of coal-fired plants by 2017, and that cost, which I understand is in the hundreds of millions of dollars, is going to be passed on to ratepayers, we're going to see humongous rate increases just automatically take place through that regulatory compliance factor. You have the one for the fuel cost, it goes up and down. But the regulatory one will not go down, it will only go up. And if you're talking about converting from coal-burning energy plants to gas, you're talking about a considerable amount of money. So the 87522 is very small compared to what it's going to be when you pass through the cost of conversion.
Would you like a response?
Thank you.
Want a response?
If you want, yeah, sure.
And I'll look over to the city attorney, but I think the response is, had we not mentioned earlier in the presentation that we had anticipated various changes over the next 5 years, that argument may have held water. The fact is that we know what's coming down the road over the next 5 years. This has all been incorporated in those base rates. So anything above and beyond changes within the base rate assumptions is what would impact those regulatory fees.
Just real quickly on San Juan, we have modeled many of the costs that would be required if we put additional catalytic reduction, emission reduction equipment on those units. Those are built in the pro forma. The costs of a new unit in IPP, which would be built somewhere around 2020, 2025, are not in that 5-year plan, but we don't know yet what those costs are.
And with respect to that regulatory adjustment charge, the way that that's structured is that it has to be the cost of a regulation or, which could include a local regulation, but that would be a decision by council that says you shall get off coal, or, you know, you're directed to pursue this. And then any of those costs that are not anticipated would be passed through that mechanism, but that would have to be a decision of council, which would incorporate a discussion of what that cost impact would be to our ratepayers.
Okay. Thank you. I think we're ready. Next item, please.
4D, Water Services Division, Ramona Buega.
Yeah, good evening, Ramona Buega, Assistant General Manager. For tonight, we're giving you a very brief update, or we're going to give you a very brief update on our production. And what we'd like to do, this is the first time that we're going to give a water update under my direction. And what we used to do is give you a lot of graphs, a lot of data, but what we'd like to do is to start simplifying it. And so tonight, our production, Raja Takidin, he's our senior civil engineer, sorry, I'm thinking electric, senior civil engineer is in charge of production, is going to give you an update of where we are with our production with respect to what our goal is, how much we purchase, how much we produce, and also as well as talk about the recent CCR, or the Consumer Confidence Report that we completed. So with that, let me introduce Raja Takidin.
Thank you. Good evening, members of the Commission. I wanted to give you a brief summary of the water resources for Glendale and the production figures for the last fiscal year that ended on June 30, 2013. Our water, we have local resources, that is the groundwater and recycled water. And then the rest we import from Metropolitan Water District. And the goal is to have 60% imported and 40% produced locally. This year, last fiscal year that we just ended, the ratio was we had 63% imported from Met and 37% produced locally. I think you have in your package the figures. Our purchase from the total the total water production was 29,670 acre-feet, which was roughly about 3.5% increase from last year, which also had a roughly 4% increase from the year before. So we see an upward trend in the water demand on our system. The groundwater, we have two basins, the Verdugo Basin and the San Fernando Basin, which is under the Superfund, and it's referred to as a Glendale operable unit. And the production from the GOU referred to was 6,820 acre-feet, which about 80% of our local resources are produced in the San Fernando Basin. It's a major local resource for us. Also in your package is the annual water quality report, which previously used to be called the Consumer Confidence Report. And this gives you an overall summary of the quality of the water that we served in the calendar year 2012. Also, I just want to give you a brief update on the Chrome 6. As you know, everyone is patiently anticipating the release from the state of their new standard for drinking water standard for Chromium 6. And last Thursday, the state declared that that proposed standard will be issued in August. So they affirmed that. So they will release that for public review and comments. So we would be watching this release very carefully because it's going to impact the way we handle our local resources. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? No questions. Thank you so much for your presentation. We have, let's see, we have, actually, no, we don't have any speaker for this. So next item, please.
4E, utility modernization.
Madam President, Commissioners, Craig Keenan, Business Transformation and Marketing Administrator. I'm here to give you an update on our utility modernization program, specifically the DOE portion of the project. I'll cover budget and expenses, work we've already completed over the past few years, talk a little bit about what work we have in progress and what we have in the planning station or stages. So this will be in thousands. Our original project with the DOE was $51.3 million was our obligation. DOE was providing us with $20 million worth of that, and the CEC gave us $1 million grant. Expenses to date are $46.6 million. We received just over $20 million in the grant, so, well, actually, I should point out that we still have the $51.3 million goal that was originally supposed to be completed in March of 2013. We got an extension to 2014. That's why you see that. Expenses minus grants are about $25.9 million. Work we've completed, we've installed about 85,000 electric meters. We've put in our meter data management system where all that data comes back from the meters through the head-in and gets stored in that system. We put in a citywide Tropos Wi-Fi system. This system has 7 VLANs, so it can be used by police and fire and parks and other city services without affecting our needs on there. So we basically, the priority is administration plus then the AMI, then our distribution automation, and then city services. We've done a number of IT upgrades to the city IT section. We put in a $2.5 million SAN system. It's a state-of-the-art data storage system. We had to do a number of upgrades for cybersecurity. When we started the project, the cybersecurity was needed improvement in the city, and we've done a lot of work working with the city ISD to make that happen. We installed 1.5 megawatts of thermal energy storage. That's the Ice Energy Ice Bear product. That's about 168 of those. A lot of them are down at Disney properties, but then there's a lot of distributed throughout the city as well. We do have on our website, you can have access to your electric data, hourly, daily, weekly, through our home energy report program. And we have a pilot for in-home displays that we've been doing for about a year now. There's about 70-some people in that pilot, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Work over the past year, things slowed down about a year ago, and the capital budget was pretty much zeroed out. So we've been concentrating on improving the backhaul and our computer systems. One thing we have been able to work on the past 6 months is extending fiber to northern Glendale. We didn't have fiber up to that part of the city, so that work has pretty much been completed. And in the next few weeks, we will be adding Tropos radios in what they're called IE3000s to take the data off or put it on the fiber, take the data from the AMI meters, put it on the fiber, and bring it back here. That'll be done probably in the next month or so. We have a distribution automation pilot program we're working on. That's 4 feeders that will be automated between 2 substations up in, I think it's Glorietta and Montrose substations. We're looking to start that project back up here in the next month or so. There has been ongoing work as far as installing the relays and actually the fiber going north is part of that project as well. I mentioned the in-home display program. We're going to look to come to council here in the next month or so to increase that pilot to about 500 customers. We would add smart thermostats and other ways to communicate through your smartphone or tablet or those kind of things with those devices.
Craig, given that we have a couple of new commissioners, do you want to talk about exactly what the smart home display does?
Oh,
very quickly.
Sure. The in-home display, if you're familiar at all with what has been promised with the grid modernization, it's to be able to see your data. A lot of utilities have little displays that might be as big as this box here. All they show is your energy usage or maybe your water usage. This display is about this big, 5 by 7 or so, and it basically has more than just the function of putting your energy data. You can put your home pictures on there. You can update those pictures from anywhere in the world. So it's got a little hook to keep people interested. It can display your water usage, your electric usage. There's a whole education component to it. It will advertise all our other public benefit programs. It can advertise different events that the city wants people to see, and it just kind of rotates in between the pictures. And it's really something special. And we had a plan to have SEVA come in and give a presentation, and we still have that plan if you'd like to see that. I mean, they can do a much better job of showing you with the slides and stuff how it works. But I'd offer that up. With the change in the commission, we had to delay that.
Do they display the rates as a snapshot because of the time of use?
It does display it. You're talking about time of use rates?
Right, right.
It will be able to do that when we get the rates done. Right now, it will show the bill in dollars, so it's something people are familiar with instead of kilowatt hours or 100 cubic feet. People don't know that. They know their dollar for the.
As an avid user, I have one in my house. It will show you how much it's costing you per hour based on what you're using. So literally, you go turn on a light, and that will change within 10 to 15 seconds. And it'll show you how your bill changes or will increase or decrease based on that change you did.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. You go turn on your air conditioning, and it goes from 20 cents an hour to $1.20 right before your eyes. So it's pretty amazing in that sense.
With that 500, will there be a cost to the customer?
No, that would be, we would pay that a public benefit for the pilot program. Okay. That's probably about $250,000 to expand to 500. It includes software, so you can remotely provision these. You know, in the pilot, we used to have to drive out there and set it up. This will be set up so people can just put in a number, a MAC address or something like that, and it'll automatically sync all this up. And that's part of testing in the pilot.
That's not going to decrease revenue to the city again as people realize how much they're actually using. All of a sudden we have another 15-20% in energy savings. All of a sudden the revenue is now.
The California Energy Commission will tell you that it's cost effective from a social standpoint.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see in a year how much it's costing the city actually.
Stuff that's in the planning station or stages, we did purchase an enterprise service bus, and the goal there is to tie all our computer systems through the bus to share data. The first thing we're looking to do is when we do the OMS DMS, we will integrate that with the MDMS, the Harris, and the Pi Historian. If you want to know what a Pi Historian is, I'd ask Ramon to come up here. No, I don't think you. I think you know. It stores time sequence data, I believe. Is that right? So, and the Harris is our customer information system. So it'll share all this information. Other things we're looking at is business intelligence tools, data warehouse to store the volumes of data we have, energy and water diversion software. We think that we can save 4 or 5% of our annual sales of electricity. We could probably find that in line losses and theft. So we're going to look to buy that software. Asset management, and we have some upgrades to our customer information system. So that's any questions on?
I do have a question. With the smart grid project, as you're doing all these installations and all, I just want to know if you've encountered any problems, complaints.
Very little. I mean, we had when we did the meter installations, we might have had 100 people say anything about the meters out of 33,000 water meters we installed and 85,000 electric. So it's a very small number.
Okay.
The home energy reports, you know, we get 1 or 2 people, but you know, that's a program. Anybody that doesn't want to receive those reports, they just tell us, we take them off the program. So it's voluntary in there.
Okay. So there hasn't been like an overwhelming issue. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Let's see. We do have one speaker. Mr. Herbert Milano, please.
Commissioners, my name is Herbert Milano. It appears to me that the role, your role as commissioners, is to try to get a synthesis, an overall view of what the status is of the capital assets of the utility. Really simple. But as simple as that is, if I were to ask some very basic questions concerning year to year, how much of the total revenue should be invested in capital improvements so I can maintain the stability of the utility? You guys can tell me. I know that. Because I've been here every time it's not presented. So if you take the electrical utility, you have your power generation facilities, you have your distribution, you have the IT systems to support it, and you need to make an investment, 10, 20% annually. That should not be a surprise. But somehow, those capital improvements don't come in as your priority, as the priority of the utility. Everything else happens to be, but that portion of it, this is our infrastructure investment every year, and then let's see what is the impact. You don't get those reports. You get fluff. You get a stack of 3H binders, a lot of minutia, but the very core, essential thing that you need to do to make a decision, are we investing what we should, is essential. You get down to 0 capital improvements, and it's like a surprise, how did we get here? And now it's an emergency and so forth. None of this should be an emergency. You make $200 million a year in electrical revenue. You know, you have 1 million megawatt hours. Why not get the type of information that allows you to say, are we investing our capital improvements properly? And if not, why not? And where is that money going? And so I've been asking for a long time for this commission to just get a synthesis, not a 10, 15, 20-minute verbiage of a whole bunch of stuff that is truly, you're as befuddled as we are. Basic essential things that you need to do at the top level to figure out if that is taking place. The same thing for water. There are pumps, there's water mains, but that stuff, as clear as it is not presented. And then we find out that we have pipes that are like 50, 60, 70 years old. There are areas within Glendale with insufficient water pressure, so if there's a fire along a hillside, there's not enough water pressure to basically protect them. Those are essential, basic things. How old is the status of a lot of the infrastructure that would render neighborhoods and put them in danger? You don't get that. So that you can then go to the city council and say, by the way, we are $200 million in arrears with regard to this infrastructure. Sorry, we cannot recommend that you do this transfer. That's the reason. At the end of the day, it boils down to the same thing. Staff should give you a synthesis that should take no more than 2 minutes for you to understand what is needed, what's the backlog. That's my point.
Thank you. Let's see. Next item, please.
5, oral communications.
Well, I have 2 speakers. First one, Mr. Herbert Milano.
Members of the Commission, my name is Herbert Milano. I want to address something to you. I've been a member of several boards in my career, and invariably I have this talk with board members, even board members who have been around for years in their respective roles. So what is the role of a board? Well, I think number one is to review the financial statements. Is this utility viable financially? I think that's like you start there. Are we solvent? That should be like the number one job to ask. Review the operational effectiveness. How do you get that? I have suggested for years now that you get a very succinct cost accounting type report to say, look, what is our cost of labor for 1,000 megawatt hours? What's our cost for labor for, let's say, 1 acre feet of water? And you do it in such a way that everything is measured against that continually, so that as quantities change, you still have the same unit of measure that you're going to use to evaluate it. What's the cost of fuel for producing 1,000 megawatts? Or for purchasing 1,000 megawatts? What's the cost of the indirect labor? Everything that goes into healthcare, workmen's compensation, and the myriad of other benefits that go into it. What's the cost for those 1,000 megawatt hours? 7 o'clock already? The same thing with some of the other key costs that I think that you need to know in order to evaluate it. You need to understand what is the impact on stakeholders. And that report of those documents, it took me 2 years to get. From the city of Glendale, they put every obstacle imaginable for us to get that number. Look at the number of individuals in 1 year that got in 2010 the immediate notice. Imagine a child coming home from school and there is no electricity for the refrigerator, there is no light for the kids to read. It's a reality. For many of these individuals, and I can tell you because I'm a landlord, and I know the difficulties that tenants have had during the years in basically meeting those obligations. Was that number considered when you were presented with this rate increase? It wasn't. Those words, the poor, fixed income, risk, families at risk, number of shutoffs, those were not considered in the evaluation of a rate increase. Why not? Are they not stakeholders? And that's my point. You need to consider the businessmen who are struggling all the time. Those are the stakeholders, and that's what you actually need to know on a monthly basis. Why does it take 8 months to get a financial statement? I cannot imagine any corporate client of mine that would not demand a financial statement 5 days after the end of the month. Why aren't you not expecting it? I think you should. This is a fairly, it's a utility with $240, $250 million a year. Why not? And that's my point.
Thank you. Next speaker, Mr. Harry Zavos.
Look at the handout I gave you. I want to refer to that in my presentation. If you wouldn't, looking at that before. Oh, we only get 3 minutes also for oral communication?
Yes, 3 minutes.
Well, I'll try. I've just given you a flow chart of how the various funds that impact the utility operate. And in back of it, you'll find the actual language from the charter. I did that because I want you to be able to check my flow chart against the actual language of the charter and not take my word for it. At the first level, we have Section 21 of Article 11 of the charter creating two funds, an electrical revenue fund, and a water revenue fund. And flowing out of that, to your left, are disbursements for the budgeted appropriations of both the water works and the electrical works. Secondly, under Section 17, from those revenue funds, money goes into a water depreciation fund and an electrical depreciation fund to cover the normal depreciation of the utility. It should happen every year under the charter, and to be used for repair, extensions, and betterment of the plant of the utility. Then money out of those revenue funds goes to the sinking funds, where they take care of servicing the bonds. Finally, the last paragraph of Section 20 and the first paragraph of Section 22 say if there's any money left over after all these funds have been taken care of and all the budgeted appropriations have been taken care of, they go to the GWP surplus fund. So the surplus from the electrical revenue fund and the surplus from the water revenue fund get commingled and become GWP surplus funds. And the charter, Section 22 of Article 11, says that those funds, except as provided in Section 22, must be used for the utility. And the only exception in that is that an amount measured by 25% of the operating revenues of the utility of those surplus funds, not from the revenue fund, but from the surplus fund, get transferred to the general reserve fund where they're available to advance money to other funds to put them on a cash basis. The charter expressly, and you'll see along the bottom, prohibits GWP funds to go to the general budget fund that pays for general appropriations. And let me just read that portion so you will see it. You go to page 6. A fund to be known as a general budget fund is hereby created. All receipts from the general tax levy, license, fines, permits, and interest on bank deposits, and all other receipts except those from the Department of Glendale Water and Power, but the city is transferring them precisely to this fund, and those which are collected for a specific purpose are here in order to be credited to some other fund shall be credited to said fund. And all disbursements on account of general budget appropriations, excepting appropriations as are. I would hope that you would go through the charter, and I would hope, because each box indicates the particular section that it's based on, these sections aren't in numerical order, they appear as they appear. So Section 20 is the first one, and then you have Section 17 and so forth. And you can look at the flow chart, you can look at the sections, see for yourself whether the flow chart reflects what the charter says.
Okay, thank you. Next item, please.
6, agenda forecast.
Okay. By the way, September, our meeting is going to be on September 19th at 5 p.m. because September 2nd is a holiday. Okay, looking at that agenda. It's pretty full. I don't have anything else to add. Do you?
I do. The one item that I would ask that we move to the next month would be the energy risk management update. As of right now, we don't have anything to update you with. If anything changes, we can leave it on there.
Okay.
But if there's nothing, then we would not bring that back in September.
Okay. Any other suggestions? Changes? Okay. If not, okay, then we'll keep the other four, right? The other four items for September 19th. And October 7th, we have 3. Let's see. I guess we should also get a short presentation on what council decided, right, with the rates. So
For the 19th.
for the 19th, yeah. So that should be there. Does it have to be agendized?
Yes, we should add that to the agenda if there are 2 of you interested in that matter.
I would second
Yes.
that.
Okay.
Okay. We have the utility modernization in October, so it's every 2 months. We used to have this scorecard, an update quarterly, I believe, where we got rid of it totally, huh?
Yeah, at this point, Madam President, members of the commission, that was based on our old 5-year strategic plan, which was the plan of the prior general manager. We have a new general manager. We're working towards a new plan, but we don't have that yet, and so we're not updating the prior 5-year plan.
Right. Do we know when the new strategic plan will be ready?
We discussed that here a couple of meetings ago. I forget what the estimate was. I know we made a commitment to come back to you within a year with the 20-year IRP, the Integrated Resource Plan, but I don't have a date for you yet on the strategic plan.
Okay. Well, I can't think of anything else at the moment. Next month, September, we can revisit the agenda again to see what we can place in November. How does that sound? Yeah? Okay. I think we're done with the agenda forecast then. Next item, please.
7, adjournment.
Need a motion?
To adjourn.
Second. Okay, I'll say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, meeting's adjourned. Thank you.